Did you know in the books, Daenerys plans to have 2 husbands who can ride her other 2 dragons, Viserion and Rhaegal? While in Meereen, Daenerys is afraid of being betrayed and thinks to herself, there at least she could rely on, or so she hoped, Grey Worm, Irri, Jeekwe, Missandei, Brown Ben Plum, and Daario beside him, glittering in gold. As she looked at them, Dany found herself wondering which of them would betray her next. This is where she decides to have 2 husbands. The dragon has 3 heads. There are 2 men in the world who I can trust, if I can find them. I will not be alone then. We will be 3 against the world, like Aegon and his sisters. Daenerys actually considers Jorah as one of her husbands since he has always been loyal and devoted to her. But this was before she found out he betrayed her. Cersei did something that was far too dark for the show. She ordered Qyburn to torture Margaery Tyrell's favourite singer, the Blue Bard. In order to get the Blue Bard to tell the High Sparrow that he slept with Margaery, Qyburn has 1 eye and 1 nipple removed from his body. He eventually says whatever Cersei wants him to say, but is later arrested again and tortured by the Faith, later going mad, unable to discern the truth from reality anymore. Lolly Stokeworth is most well known to show-only watchers for marrying Bronn of the Blackwater in the show, but not much is known about her otherwise. The books have much darker events for her though. For example, during the King's Landing riots, the one where Sansa was almost until she was saved by the Hound, Lolly's was pulled from her horse and by 100 men. She is later found wandering on the streets. The show omitted one horrific aspect of the Unsullied's training. In the books, we learn that they are castrated, start training as infants, and kill an infant once they're ready to become soldiers. However, to make this upbringing even more brutal and tragic, we learn, on the day a boy is cut, he is given a puppy to take care of. At the end of the first year, the boy is made to strangle the puppy. Should he fail to do so, he is killed and fed to the surviving dogs. While Targaryens have silver blonde hair in the show, they are not completely accurate representations of their family's trait. In the books, Targaryens also have violet eyes, which would have given them an even more distinct look in the Game of Thrones world. So why didn't the show keep it? The simple reason is that the coloured contact lenses are a pain to wear, and Emilia Clarke and Harry Lloyd, who play Daenerys and Viserys Targaryen, also had difficulty conveying emotions with them on. Ramsay Snow forcibly marries Donella Hornwood, but ends up locking her in a tower after their wedding, and not providing her with any food whatsoever. She is later found dead like so. They came too late for poor Lady Hornwood though. After their wedding, the bastard had locked her in a tower and neglected to feed her. Bran had heard men saying that when Sir Roderick had smashed down the door, he found her with her mouth all bloody and her fingers chewed off. King Robert wanted to abdicate his throne, but didn't because he didn't like Joffrey. Evidence for this comes from when Robert was at first fine with not punishing Arya or her wolf on the trident, and only relented when Cersei made him. Stannis also recalls how Joffrey once opened up a pregnant cat's stomach with a dagger to see the kittens inside. When he went to show Robert, Robert hit Joffrey so hard Stannis thought he had killed him. All this and more is probably why Robert didn't abdicate. George R.R. Martin pushed back against claims that Daenerys was a white savior during the Mysa scene. This is because, in the show, Dany freed slaves in Essos who were notably all brown. However, Martin clarified that those scenes were shot in Morocco, and the showrunners were simply working with the extras that they had. Most of these people have obviously not read the books. If they had, they would know there is no racial component to slavery as practiced on Essos. It is based on Roman and Greek slavery, who were just as willing to enslave other Greeks and Romans as they were Celts, Goths, Germans, and Africans. It's on the page. Sadly, the show definitely portrayed Slavers Bay as more the Middle East than the Mediterranean, which is probably more how it should have been portrayed, with the slavers making up every kind of ethnicity and background to show that it was just business. Loras and Renly are only hinted at being lovers. Meanwhile, the show makes it very clear that the duo are sleeping together, with 2 show-only bedroom scenes in both season 1 and 2. However, in the books, the only hints we get of their relationship are through character dialogue. For example, here's a conversation between Tyrion and Oberyn from A Storm of Swords. "There are those who say that Sir Loras is better than Leo Lawnthorne ever was," said Tyrion. "Renly's little rose, I doubt that." Another is when Stannis and Renly parley. Renly says, "A year ago I was scheming to make Marjorie Roberts queen, but the boar got Robert and I got Marjorie. You'll be pleased to know she came to me, a maid, in your bed. She's like to die that way," which is honestly one of Stannis' best comebacks and doesn't seem like he hates Renly for preferring men to women. Jaime Lannister's story is completely different. In the show, he stayed loyal to Cersei until the end and even went as far as saying he didn't care about the people he saved at King's Landing. In the books, however, he breaks up with Cersei in the coolest way possible, with her sending a letter begging him to come and save her from the High Sparrow, and he casually has the maester who has read the letter throw her desperate cry for help into the fire. Instead of being obsessed with Cersei, he leaves everything to run away with Brienne, who, like Cersei, pleads with him to help her rescue Sansa or the Hound will kill her, showing where Jaime's priorities now lie. And this probably ties into Cersei's Valonqar prophecy, "And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you," which is probably Jaime killing Cersei. What would have happened if Viserys hadn't gotten himself killed and instead lived a few weeks longer? Well, once Drogo died and Daenerys gave birth to her dragons, Viserys probably would have claimed one of the dragons for himself, probably the Silver Cream one. And just imagine how terrifying Viserys would have been with a dragon of his own. He truly could make true on his threats and try to rally the Seven Kingdoms against Joffrey with his own dragon, since he would not have waited around in Slaver's Bay like Daenerys. Honestly, it actually makes for a pretty interesting story. Like, what if after Renly died, Viserys put himself forward to marry Marjorie with a small dragon? Or, instead, he marries Ariana Martell and rallies Dorne behind himself and his dragon? Illyroy and Varys probably would have gotten one of the dragons to young Fagon, meaning he would have 3 Targaryens each with a dragon. Qyburn is far more sinister than his show portrayal. While he appears as a calm, somewhat eccentric maester on screen, he's a ruthless torturer in the books. Take, for example, when he is given Khaleesi Stokeworth by Cersei. Later on, he informs Cersei, "I fear Lady Khaleesi is no longer capable of ruling Stokeworth, or indeed of feeding herself." Qyburn was performing a vivisection on her, and it doesn't get any better for her. She ends up dying while screaming in the black cells due to Qyburn. The Ned Stark vs. Jaime Lannister scene is very different in the books. Compared to the show, it takes place at night in the pouring rain with both Ned and Jaime's men on horseback. These details were planned by Dan and Dave, but in the end couldn't be added due to budget constraints, which George R.R. Martin regrets, as he felt the book version was more atmospheric and cool. That said, many book readers are happy with the result, as we got to see more of Jaime in action before losing his hand. When Arya, Gendry and Hot Pie were captured by the Mountain's men and brought to Harrenhal, there they saw the women in Harrenhal stocks free for men to use in any way they please. The mere mention of it was casually noted in an Arya chapter. The stocks were hammered together for Pretty Pia and the other women who'd shared their favours with Lannister soldiers. Stripped and shaved, they were left in the middle ward beside the bear pit, free for the use of any man who wanted them. Funny enough, the girl Pia appears in the books quite a lot. Arya doesn't like her because she is making her way through all the Lannister guards. Then, in Book 3, she is actually sent to sleep with Jaime by Qyburn, but he refuses her, and later she travels with Jaime to Riverrun and is sleeping with one of Jaime's squires. Cersei blowing up the Sept ruined Game of Thrones Season 7 and 8. Here's why. Even though the music, cinematography, and acting was incredibly well executed, the plot never recovered after this moment because, essentially, Cersei destroyed House Lannister's strongest ally, meaning that when Daenerys invaded Westeros, she was too overpowered. She had her Dothraki, Unsullied, and even Yara's Ironborn, plus so many potential allies in Westeros. Whereas Cersei had just House Lannister, that's it. Meaning the plot had to contort for Daenerys to spend all of Season 7 losing when she should have just walked into King's Landing and taken the Iron Throne. Now, if Cersei hadn't killed the Tyrells, but still had them, then Daenerys would have been too afraid to make a landing, since a combined Lannister and Tyrell army would be large enough to repel her, creating an interesting chessboard for Season 7. But as it stands, Season 7 is just nonsense. In the Game of Thrones show, we learn of what the Mountain did to Elia Martell, after he admits it during his trial by combat with Oberyn Martell. However, the show admits the true extent of the brutality and gore during the scene. As Tyrion told Oberyn, "I am not lying," Sir Armory dragged Princess Rhaenys out from under her father's bed and stabbed her to death. He had some men-at-arms with him, but I do not know their names. He leaned forward. It was Sir Gregor Clegane who smashed Prince Aegon's head against a wall, and your sister Elia with his blood and brains still on his hands. What is this now? Fruit from a Lannister? Oberyn smiled coldly. Your father gave the commands, yes? No. He spoke the lie without hesitation, and never stopped to ask himself why he should. The Dornishman raised one thin black eyebrow. Such a dutiful son, and such a very feeble lie. This is Robb Stark's greatest regret. When they told me Winterfell had fallen, I wanted to go north at once, he said, with a hint of defensiveness. I wanted to free Bran and Rickon, but I never dreamed that Theon could harm them, truly. If I had, it is too late for ifs and too late for rescues, Catelyn said. All that remains is vengeance. Brienne of Tarth bites off part of Vargo Hort's ear before leaving Harrenhal. This scene was omitted from the show, but occurred when Vargo was trying to force himself on Brienne. This is what led Vargo to dump her in the bear pit. Of course, Brienne was eventually saved by Jaime, but what about Vargo's ear? It became infected afterwards, as Timian tells Brienne. His ear turned black and started leaking pus. But Vargo faced a worse fate, as he had his arms and legs chopped off by the Mountain before later dying. Doran Martell, the Prince of Dorne, was one of the great players of the Game of Thrones, unlike his show counterpart. In the books, he pretends to be weak, but is actually plotting the downfall of the Lannisters and looking for ways to put Dorne in control by having Targaryens rule again, and having them marry Dornish people along the way. In the show, he is barely given any depth, is actually weak, and ends up dying in a pretty non-significant way. Kit Harington, actor of Jon Snow, recently came out and admitted mistakes were made with the Game of Thrones ending. He also noted how the final season was rushed, particularly with the fewer episodes, but that everyone on set was so tired at that point, and the show couldn't have gone on any longer. Despite George R.R. Martin asking HBO to make it 13 seasons, which only would have been possible with a rotation of showrunners, and even then, many of the actors probably would not have wanted to stay on for so long. After Stannis declared Joffrey to be born of incest, Cersei and Littlefinger in King's Landing spread rumors that Shireen's father was not Stannis. Instead, they claimed she was fathered by Patchface in an attempt to discredit Stannis' accusations and humiliate him. The show did not include this, probably as Patchface, who was Stannis' court fool and jester at Dragonstone, was not included in the show either. However, Patchface does have grayscale, and so does Shireen, which means she might have contracted her grayscale from him. Alistair Thorne was sent to the Wall because he was a Targaryen loyalist during Robert's rebellion. After Robert's victory, he was given a choice of execution or joining the Watch. He chose the Watch, which is extremely ironic since he would go on to belittle and bully one of the only remaining heirs to the Targaryen dynasty and the son of the man he was fighting for. However, what would have been his reaction to finding out Jon's parentage? Would he have supported Jon's claim to the Iron Throne? Greywind was not actually killed in a stable during the Red Wedding. In the Game of Thrones show, we are shown Grey Wind being surrounded outside the stable he was kept in while the events of the Red Wedding were taking place. Being cornered, he couldn't do anything but get killed at that moment. However, in the books, Grey Wind actually escaped and killed 4 Frey wolfhounds and the kennel master while being attacked. Grey Wind eventually succumbed to his injuries, however, and died. All the Stark kids are wargs. In the show, we only really see Bran being a warg by going into his wolf as well as with Hodor. However, in the books, all the Stark kids warg into their direwolves except for Sansa. It is even believed that Jon Snow warged into Ghost when he was killed by the Night's Watch. Rickon wargs into his direwolf, which might have caused him to become more wolf than human, and eventually eat other people on Skargos. Arya wargs into Nymeria and Cat to become a more proficient killer for the Faithless Assassins. Robb might have walked into Grey Wind to discover the secret path that he used to win the Battle of Oxcross against the Lannisters, since afterwards, Grey Wind was credited with finding the Goat Path. But maybe it was Robb inside of Grey Wind, looking for a way to surprise the Lannister host in the Westerlands. Jon Snow only just won the election thanks to a single vote by Aemon Targaryen to become the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch over Alistair Thorne. However, in the books, Jon Snow ended up winning 66% or 2/3 of the votes at least. But how did he do this? Well, Samwell rigged the elections. In the books, there were multiple votes held, and in the end, Sam schemed so the Shadow Tower and Eastwatch by the Sea gave all their votes to Jon Snow. George R.R. Martin had problems with the blood and cheese scene in House of the Dragon Season 2 and felt the book version was stronger. In a now deleted post on his blog, he revealed that he argued against the way it was planned to be done way back in 2022. His main problem was the absence of Maelor, who was not in the show, but present in the books during the scene as one of Helena's 3 children. In the books, Helena offers her life to save her child, while in the show, she tries to bribe them with jewelry. Additionally, she picks Maelor to be killed, only for Blood and Cheese to kill Jaehaerys instead. Put simply, Martin, as well as many book readers, felt the source material version was stronger, with Martin adding that the killers were crueler in the books, Helena displayed more courage, and losing the Sophie's Choice aspect of the moment weakened the scene. The absence of Maelor, one of Helena's 3 children in Season 2, could have a huge butterfly effect on events down the line. George R.R. Martin already criticized House of the Dragon for not including Maelor in the blood and cheese scene, and although he was told it was due to budget issues and was assured Helena could give birth to him in Season 3, Martin later learned there were no plans to include Maelor at all. This is a problem, as in the books, Maelor plays a role later on with regards to what happens to Helena. George R.R. Martin has been pretty scathing in his now deleted Not a Blog post, which he might have had to take down for legal reasons, as he is most likely under contract with HBO. It also doesn't bode well that George says there are other problems being contemplated for House of the Dragon Season 3 and 4. Robert Baratheon died as a result of a boar hunt gone wrong. In the show, we never saw the boar attack him, but we did see the royal hunt in Season 1, Episode 6, which was not accurate to say the least. In the scene, Robert only had Lancel Lannister, Renly Baratheon, and Ser Barristan accompanying him. In reality, a royal hunt would have had far more people, dogs, horns, tents, and even a royal huntsman organizing everything. George R.R. Martin even called it his least favorite scene. That's how a king goes hunting. He wouldn't have just been walking through the woods with 3 of his friends holding spears, hoping to meet a boar. Instead, it should have been more like we got in Season 1, Episode 3 of House of the Dragon, which had a far more accurate representation with King Viserys and a proper budget. We didn't really get a good explanation as to why Stannis can't help Melisandre make more shadow babies, except by mentioning that his fires burn low or something when she goes off to collect Gendry. Meanwhile, in the books, Stannis and Melisandre make 2 shadow babies, one to kill Renly and the other to take Storm's End. However, after this, Stannis ages significantly with grey hair and also has trouble sleeping. Here's a description of Stannis by Davos in A Storm of Swords. He seemed 10 years older than the man that Davos had left at Storm's End when he set sail for the Blackwater and the battle that would be their undoing. The king's close-cropped beard was spider-webbed with grey hairs, and he had dropped 2 stone or more of weight. All of this is believed to be a result of the cost of the Shadow Assassin. Tywin Lannister drops a line that seems out of character. During the small council meeting, he says, "Dragons haven't won a war in 300 years. Armies win them all the time." While it's true, dragons won Aegon his crown 300 years ago, Tywin's statement misses a crucial point. When dragons did exist, they won nearly every war. For example, Maegor crushed the Faith Militant using his dragon. Jaehaerys destroyed the Dornish, and the Dance of the Dragon was decided by dragons. Ygritte's killer is never known in the books. In the show, Olly was the one who struck the arrow into Ygritte, and at a time, it was similar to what she did to his father. However, in the books, there is nobody identified as Ygritte's killer. She just gets struck among the crossfire. However, Jon Snow might have been the one to loose the arrow that killed her. Even though he checked to make sure it wasn't his own arrow, he used a bunch of different arrows during the battle. Ross is not a character in the books. In fact, she's the first character specifically created for the show. She mostly fills a similar role to a prostitute named Alalea in the books. Originally from the Summer Isles, Alalea is actually used as a cover by Tyrion for his visits to Shae. Cersei threatens to have her harmed to pressure Tyrion, much like Ross was harmed in the show. Moreover, in the books, Oberyn goes on to bed Alalea when he visits King's Landing. The Thenns are completely different compared to the show, where they are portrayed as savage cannibals who even Tormund had a problem with. In the books, however, they happen to be the more civilized tribe with better access to weapons, more obedient followers, and they also have laws and lords in their valley. They are even considered closer to the people south of the Wall than any other wildling group, a far cry from crow-eating savages. Shai is probably the most mysterious place in the Game of Thrones universe, and was mentioned a fair bit in the Game of Thrones show. It's where Melisandre hails from, but little is known about it. As a result, much of it is unknown, so mysterious that there aren't even children present there. Yet, the population of Ashai is no greater than that of a good-sized market town. By night, the streets are deserted, and only one building in 10 shows a light. Even at the height of day, there are no crowds to be seen, no tradesmen shouting their wares in noisy markets, no women gossiping at a well. Those who walk the streets of Ashai are masked and veiled, full of necromancers, night walkers, pyromancers, blood mages, torturers, and poisoners. Even the Dothraki are afraid of the people of Ashai and do not go there. There is a rare case of male-on-male involving a Maester Cerwyn on Victarion Greyjoy's ship, the uncle of Theon Greyjoy. Maester Cerwyn is forced to serve Victarion by Euron after the Shield Islands in the Reach were taken by the Ironborn. Cerwyn gets by 4 sailors. Cerwyn had come creeping to the captain to complain that 4 of the crew had dragged him below decks and used him as a woman. "Here is how you put an end to that," Victarion had told him, slamming a dagger down on the table between them. Cerwyn took the blade, too afraid to refuse it, the captain judged. Later on, Cerwyn is suspected of poisoning Victarion and has his throat slit and thrown into the sea. Sadly, this entire plotline of bringing the Iron Fleet to Daenerys in Slavers Bay was given to Asha and Theon, and nowhere near as interesting. Maggie the Frog, the same person who prophesied Cersei's doom with her kids dying and her Valenka fate, is actually Jean Westerling's great-grandmother. In the books, Jean is the woman who Robb ends up marrying, and in the show is replaced by Talissa. So it's ironic in a way that it was 2 Westerlings who ended up bringing down both House Stark through Robb's dumb marriage, and Cersei will bring down House Lannister because of what Maggie told her. Qyburn sent Jaime a prostitute, saying, "I thought you might enjoy a bit of exercise. Pia is quite skilled, would you not agree?" And so Willing. She had been that, certainly, Jamie thought. She had slipped in his door and out of her clothes so quickly that Jamie had thought he was still dreaming. It hadn't been until the woman slid in under his blankets and put his good hand on her that he roused. She was a pretty little thing too. I was a girl when the king gave you your cloak, she confessed. You were so handsome, all in white, and everyone said what a brave knight you were. Sometimes when I'm with some man, I close my eyes and pretend it's you on top of me. I never truly thought I'd have you though. Sending her away had not been easy after that. But Jamie had done it all the same. I have a woman, he reminded himself. There is actually a third continent we never see but only hear of. In Game of Thrones, we are mainly exposed to Westeros and Essos thanks to Dany's storyline. However, there is a third continent to the south across the summer scene called Sothoyos. It is notably home to the Sothori, or brindled men. Maester Yandel describes the Sothori as massively muscled, big-boned creatures, not men, with long arms, sloped foreheads, huge square teeth, heavy jaws, coarse black hair, flat noses that suggest snouts, and thick skins brindled in patterns of brown and white, making them seem more hog-like than human. Sothori women cannot breed with any save their own males. When mated with men from Essos or Westeros, they bring forth only stillbirths, many of which are hideously deformed. There are also reports of half-men, lizard men. Jaime Lannister killed the Mad King because he planned on lighting King's Landing on fire. But the very first moment Jaime ever thought about it may have been when he was standing guard outside their door as the king was abusing his wife, Rhaela. This was a usual occurrence that mainly took place after Aerys gave a man to the flames. Jaime told his fellow Kingsguard, Jon Darry, that they were sworn to protect the queen as well. However, Darry tells him that Aerys is the only exception. Have you ever wondered why the old Valyrians never came to Westeros? They conquered all of Essos, including the slave cities, the Rhoynar, and the free cities. However, Valyria only ever came to Westeros until Aegon Targaryen eventually invaded with his two sisters and their dragons. Why did it take so long? Well, from a Tyrion chapter, it was said that the Freehold's grasp had reached as far as Dragonstone, but never to the mainland of Westeros itself. Odd that Dragonstone is no more than a rock. The wealth was farther west, but they had dragons. Surely they knew it was there. There are a number of theories as to why they didn't, but one particularly interesting one is that old Valyrians were scared of wargs and skin changers controlling their dragons, so they steered clear. Or maybe it had to do with the White Walkers to the north, but honestly, we don't know. Sansa Stark sees Janos Slynt days after him pushing her father, Ned Stark, down to be beheaded by Ilyn Payne. She notably wishes that some hero would throw him down and cut off his head, but a voice inside her whispered, there are no heroes. In the end, it was Jon Snow who would eventually cut Slynt's head off during their time at the Night's Watch. So hopefully one day, Sansa learns about this and realizes the brother she ignored was always a hero. What if Littlefinger's motivation was not power, but rather saving Catelyn from the Starks? A popular theory suggests that rather than owning lands and armies, Littlefinger's goal all along was to rescue Cat. One night, he slept with Lysa while drunk and thought he was with Catelyn, leading him to believe she loved him back. This is what fuels his obsession with her, which later gets transferred to Sansa, whom he decides to save instead, making him the hero of the story in his own head. There's a theory that the Maesters schemed to form the Stark, Tully, Baratheon, and Arryn alliance in order to remove Aerys and House Targaryen from Westeros. Lady Dustin remarked to Theon Greyjoy how she was pained when she learned that Brandon Stark was to marry Catelyn Tully instead of her, which was all because of his father, Rickard Stark. Rickard Stark had great ambitions too, southern ambitions, that would not be served by having his heir marry the daughter of one of his own vassals. It is the same reason why Rickard sent Ned to foster with House Arryn. The goal was to exert pressure on Ares without going to war, with the ideal scenario being having Rhaegar on the throne. Whether this was true or not is redundant in the end, as Ares essentially kick-started Robert's rebellion when he killed Rickard and Brandon. Alicent Hightower is an objectively worse mother than even Cersei Lannister, because unlike Joffrey, Aegon wasn't inherently evil. We see this in episodes 6 and 7 of season 1, where he was just a bit of a lusty boy who needed to be taught to respect women. However, instead of raising him to be a man worthy of the Iron Throne so that Viserys might choose him over Rhaenyra, Alicent raised him to believe he had to take the throne because otherwise their entire family would die, which is objectively not true. So, of course, this would skewer his worldview and have him develop unhealthy habits. We also see him crying at the end of episode 2 after his son died, and rather than console him, Alicent goes and bangs Criston Cole. She doesn't even know how to comfort her own son. If she had raised him better, Viserys might have chosen him. There was a nice bit of symbolism when Jon Snow was with the wildlings. When riding with Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, Jon gets a new cloak, and it happens to be made of sheepskin. Jon is half Stark, with their sigil being a direwolf, as we already know. And so by wearing this sheepskin cloak, Jon is both literally and figuratively a wolf in sheep's clothing, which should have told the wildlings that he was not to be trusted. It seems like in the show, Aemond had a thing for older women, like we saw with Sylvia, the he sees, who is old enough to be his mother. And later on, he starts sleeping with Alice Rivers in the books, who is supposed to be in her 40s. Although Aemond and Alice sleeping together seems much less likely in Season 3, considering what we saw of Alice Rivers in Season 2. But nonetheless, Aemond likes older women, and not only that, but he likes being nurtured by them, which we saw in Episode 2 of House of the Dragon. This nurturing is probably something he did not get from his own mother, but desperately wanted. Now, we don't actually ever see Aemond sleep with Sylvia, so maybe their relationship is just that. But he is naked, which suggests a element to their interactions. So yeah, it seems like Aemond might also be into incest. Jaime was once sent to Riverrun to potentially marry Lysa, but this never came to be. However, what if Catelyn had been promised to Jaime instead of Brandon Stark, which makes a lot more sense considering how close Riverrun and Castle Rock are. Honestly, if Cersei had been able to marry Rhaegar without incident, Jaime and Catelyn could have been pretty happy together, since Book Catelyn finds him very attractive and they both have strong personalities. It is considered offensive or repulsive in Westeros to eat dogs, cats, and rats, though people will choke them down if they are starving due to poverty, a military siege, or a really bad winter. However, the Giscari of Slavers Bay in Essos do eat dogs, and this is meant to authorize them and make them seem eviler and more untrustworthy. However, some East Asian countries eat dogs, and it doesn't mean they are evil, they just treat dogs like we treat pigs. Tommen and Sansa could have been a really good couple, and king and queen. So instead of marrying Tyrion in Season 3, Sansa is made to marry Tommen, which actually makes a lot more sense age-wise. Then, when Joffrey eventually dies without an heir, Tommen and Sansa become king and queen of Westeros. Obviously, this would screw up the Tyrell alliance, but they could have been a great king and queen of Westeros, with Tywin as their hand and no Joffrey or Cersei to rule things. Honestly, if Daenerys had invaded and she was going up against Tommen and Sansa with Tywin, I might actually be rooting for them instead, since they are both really nice and good people at heart. Whereas Daenerys is planning to bring fire and blood to Westeros. Maybe Daenerys could ally with the Tyrells and marry Loras, since they would have been jaded about losing the Iron Throne. Honestly, it sounds like a lot of fun. We have a lot of hilarious characters like Bronn, Tyrion, the Hound, Olenna, and even Tormund. However, who was the funniest throughout the show? Well, Bronn was definitely the funniest when he was around Tyrion, but became less funny without him around. Tyrion remains pretty funny, but was definitely at his funniest in the early seasons. Olenna probably doesn't have enough screen time to be the winner, and Tormund's humor got stale by the end. making the Hound our winner. Cersei was supposed to marry Oberyn, and honestly, they would have been such a power couple together, since Oberyn is probably one of the few people Jaime would actually be a little afraid to fight, since he might lose or get poisoned. Oberyn is attractive enough to seduce Cersei and could deal with her craziness better than most. Honestly, this coupling might have produced the greatest good, considering Cersei is crazy in the books, and anyone else Jaime would have murdered. King Viserys is actually a worse father than Robert Baratheon, because unlike Joffrey, Aegon and Aemond had it in them to be raised into good men. However, instead, Alicent raised them both terribly, and Viserys didn't do anything about it. Now, at least Robert's younger children, Tommen and Marcella, were pretty great, and Robert couldn't do much to pry Cersei away from Joffrey since he was indebted to her father. However, Viserys wasn't indebted to House Hightower, and he should have had the realization to tell his wife, "Look, Alicent, you're doing a bad job raising our boys. Do better or I'll ward them off, like Daeron, so they have a chance to become good men one day, and potentially worthy of being chosen as heirs." But instead, he just let his family go on hating Rhaenyra's family, when Viserys had literally all the power to fix the schism in the House of the Dragon. Barristan Selmy is present when Robert Baratheon calls for Dany to be killed in the small council meeting. In the show, Ned is the only one against the proposition. However, with Barristan's presence in the books, he provides one more voice to speak out against Robert's plans. "Your Grace, there is honor in facing an enemy on the battlefield, but none in killing him in his mother's womb. Forgive me, but I must stand with Lord Eddard." Jaime Lannister is way more overpowered and a better swordsman than his show counterpart. George even said he would annihilate Aragorn in a fight. However, what if Oberyn and Jaime fought? Who would win? Well, they are both the same age, but Oberyn would probably win since Jaime would be unfamiliar fighting a spear, whereas Oberyn has spent his life fighting people with swords. Oberyn would deploy the same tactics he used against the Mountain and kill Jaime by targeting the weakness in his armor. Renly planned to marry Margaery to Robert, the same way Viserys took a much younger Alicent Hightower to wife, even though he had children from his first wife who were the apparent heirs to the Iron Throne. So, if Cersei died, things could have played out like in House of the Dragon, where there would have been a Red House Lannister faction at court supporting Joffrey, Tommen, and Marcella, and a Green faction supporting Margaery's children by Robert. Then when Robert dies of old age, a war of succession would erupt, with House Tyrell fighting against House Lannister, since Joffrey is crazy and born of incest. It would honestly depend on who Joffrey, Tommen, and Marcella ended up marrying to secure alliances, and whoever Margaery's children ended up marrying as well, to determine the outcome. Maybe the Green faction would marry Daenerys and convince her to invade with their help. Robert Baratheon may have foreshadowed Jon Snow becoming king in the North in the very first book in his conversation with Ned. When Robert first arrived in Winterfell, he was shocked at the emptiness of the North and asked Ned where his people were. Ned joked that the kings were a rare sight in the North, to which Robert replied, "More likely they were just hiding under snow." Now, Jon is a potential king hiding under the name Snow. This might or might not be intentional, but it's quite funny if it does foreshadow Jon Snow's fate. Cersei failed to seduce Ned Stark in exchange for his silence about her kids. If friends can turn to enemies, enemies can become friends. Your wife is 1,000 leagues away, and my brother has fled. Be kind to me, Ned. I swear to you, you shall never regret it. Ned refused by asking if Cersei offered the same to Jon Arryn. But what would have happened if Ned took up her offer in order to buy time, since refusing Cersei gave her time to outmaneuver him? The show cut off many of Barristan Selmy's lines when he was relieved of his King's Guard's duties. In the books, Barristan protested by mentioning how he was chosen for the role at the age of 23, and how he gave up everything from his claim to his ancestral keep to the girl he was supposed to marry. He also mentions fighting alongside some of the greatest Kingsguard knights like the White Bull and Prince Lewin of Dorne, along with Sir Arthur Dane, while serving 3 kings: Jaehaerys II, Aerys II, and King Robert. When all of it is ignored by the crown, Cersei will be reminded of why he should be aware the old man in a profession where most men die young. when Barristan eventually invades Westeros with Daenerys, since in the books he is still alive and will be commanding her armies. Moreover, people will flock to fight along Barristan the Bold. If Jon Snow is revealed to be the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, then would marrying Sansa be a sure way to consolidate power in the north, since Daenerys probably wouldn't marry Jon, who has a better claim to the throne than herself, nor an ex-Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Meaning Jon and Sansa could marry to secure the north and potentially make a claim on the throne after Daenerys and Aegon have a second dance of the dragons. Renly Baratheon and Joffrey have some interactions, and it's very clear that they don't like each other. For example, when Renly meets Sansa, Joffrey is not a fan of how Renly addresses her as a wolf girl. Joffrey stiffened beside her. "Have a care how you address my betrothed." Later on, Joffrey gives his uncle a look of pure loathing. Renly also happened to mockingly laugh at Joffrey when he heard Arya threw his sword in the river. He was laughing so much that Robert had to have him escorted outside of court, and Renly responds like so. Lord Renly stifled his laughter. "My brother is too kind. I can find the door myself," he bowed to Joffrey. "Perchance later, you'll tell me how a 9-year-old girl the size of a wet rat managed to disarm you with a broom handle and throw your sword in the river." If the Hound hadn't run away and helped House Lannister win the Battle of the Blackwater, and Sansa was told that she needed to marry a Lannister in Book 3 or Season 3, and her options were only Tyrion and the mortally injured Lancel, she might have asked to marry the Hound instead. Since if the Lannisters want to claim the North, they need someone strong and intimidating to hold it, who also couldn't be used as a hostage, which actually makes the Hound a good candidate. Also, if Sansa picks him, then it is less likely once Sansa returns back to Winterfell with her husband, she won't just immediately have her bannermen kill the Hound once they are back in the Northern Territory. It definitely would have been a very Beauty and the Beast vibe, but if given the choice between the Hound and Tyrion, Sansa would obviously choose the Hound. Stannis Baratheon should have won the Battle of Winterfell, installed the Starks as rulers only for them to either betray him by making Sansa queen or Jon king, or refusing to pursue his claim to the Iron Throne. Having Stannis still be around when Daenerys, Cersei, and the others were fighting would have made him a cool dark horse. And maybe, tragically, have him burn his daughter to try and stop the others' invasion and then himself. Since, unlike the others, he was the king who cared. Sansa dreaded the idea of sleeping with Tyrion. She heard the sound of her husband as he undressed himself. When he hopped up on the bed and put his hand on her chest, Sansa could not help but shudder. She lay with her eyes closed, every muscle tense, dreading what might come next. Would he touch her again, kiss her? Should she open her legs for him now? She did not know what was expected of her. When Winterfell was under Theon's control and surrounded by northern allies, he actually considered taking the Black and joining the Night's Watch on Maester Luwin's suggestion. "I have black garb aplenty. Once I tear the krakens off, even my horse is black. I could rise high in the Watch, Chief of Rangers, likely even Lord Commander. Let Asha keep the Bloody Islands. They're as dreary as she is. If I served at Eastwatch, I could command my own ship, and there's fine hunting beyond the Wall. As for women, what wildling woman wouldn't want a prince in her bed?" A slow smile crept across his face. "A black cloak can't be turned. I'd be as good as any man." In the end, Theon didn't do this, probably because Jon Snow would kill him, but if he had joined the Night's Watch, that would have been very interesting. There are rumors that the Cleganes had a younger sister who died under mysterious circumstances. Although there aren't too many details, it is heavily implied that the Mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane, killed her. This might be why the Hound has some affection and a soft spot for both Arya and Sansa Stark, who he possibly sees his younger sister in them. The Mountain also killed 2 of his wives and possibly his father, which is why the Hound sought refuge with the Lannisters. Cersei reveals an interesting detail that should have informed Robert Baratheon that Joffrey wasn't his true-born son. Cersei mentioned how Joffrey would always cry whenever Robert picked him up, a stark contrast compared to his bastard sons and daughters. His Grace did not like that. His bastards had always gurgled at him happily and sucked his finger when he put it in their little baseborn mouths. Robert wanted smiles and cheers, always. So he went where he found them, to his friends and his When Ned Stark learned of Tyrion's dagger that was used to attempt to kill Bran Stark, he was already thinking ahead to war with the Lannisters. He instructed Catelyn to tell the northern houses to strengthen their defenses and was even prepared to work with the Ironborn. And from this day on, I want a careful watch kept over Theon Greyjoy. If there is war, we shall have sore need of his father's fleet. This was all the way back in episode 3. Sir Barristan Selmy is the most humble guy in all of Game of Thrones. He has a conversation with Daenerys Targaryen about her brother Rhaegar and mentions how well he performed at the tournament at Storm's End. However, when she specifically asks if Rhaegar was the champion, he says, "No, your grace." That honor went to another knight of the Kingsguard, who unhorsed Prince Rhaegar in the final tilt. That knight happened to be Barristan himself, showing just how humble he is. He also unhorsed some other notable characters, where he unhorsed Lord Robert Baratheon, Prince Oberyn Martell, Lord Luton Hightower, Lord Jon Connington, Lord Jason Mallister, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. A hilarious tidbit is that this feat was not published in the White Book at the time, which means Barristan wrote all his accomplishments before fleeing King's Landing. There's another Martell player in the A Song of Ice and Fire books named Quentyn Martell. In the show, Dorne more or less becomes a joke following Oberyn's death. However, they still have major political plans and ambitions in the books, and one of them is having Doran Martell's second eldest child, Quentyn, marry Daenerys. Unfortunately, when Quentyn meets Dany in Meereen, she rejects him, probably because he is not that conventionally attractive. However, Quentyn still plans on taming Daenerys' third dragon, Viserion, only to end up being cooked by dragonfire by Rhaegal, who sneaks up behind him. However, there is a crazy theory that he actually survived. The burnt body is not his, which means he might have successfully stolen a dragon and will bring this dragon back to Westeros so he can have a second Dance of the Dragons. Joffrey Baratheon is less of a wuss compared to his betrayal in the Game of Thrones show. He even spars with Robb Stark in Winterfell, and it's pretty competitive to the point that Joffrey even mocks Robb. Robb may be a child, I am a prince, and I grow tired of swatting at Starks with a play sword. Joffrey later suggests having them spar with live steel, only to be denied by Sir Roderick Castle. Loras Tyrell is so much more interesting. In the show, he is more or less a gay character, and just about every scene involving him is related to that aspect. In the books, however, he is essentially the second coming of Jaime Lannister, who even beat Jaime in a tournament. He joins the Kingsguard, so he doesn't have to love anyone other than Renly, though joining the Order also provides the benefit of him not marrying a woman. The same way Jaime only joined the Kingsguard so he could be with Cersei and only Cersei. So both of them are extremely loyal to those they love. Loras leads the assault on Dragonstone and even takes the stronghold, though he is gravely injured in the process. Overall, he is an unbelievable knight with a deeper character who happens to be gay, rather than his being the point of his character. Maester Pycelle more or less gropes Sansa Stark following Ned Stark's execution in King's Landing. On the guise of checking if she was ill, Pycelle made the traumatized Sansa take off her clothes and assessed her whole body. Once Grand Maester Pycelle came with a box of flasks and bottles to ask if she was ill. He felt her brow, made her and touched her all over, while her bedmaid held her down. This scene was notably omitted from the Game of Thrones show. Back in Season 1, Tyrion Lannister made a deal with the Mountain Clansmen to spare his life in exchange for helping them win the Vale. It's important to remember that the debt is not paid as of yet. The Game of Thrones show never touched on it again, but could it play a role in the books later on? Perhaps Tyrion is tasked with conquering the Vale on behalf of Daenerys and helps the clansmen take it over after the Vale armies march to Winterfell for Sansa. There is going to be a second Dance of the Dragons between Daenerys and Aegon Targaryen. However, the TV show chose to omit young Griff, or Aegon Targaryen. He's another contender for the Iron Throne, and if he is in fact a real Targaryen, being the son of Rhaegar, he has a more valid claim than Daenerys. It's unclear why the showrunners decided not to include him, but there's no doubt that his presence could have helped the show, since Daenerys' descent to madness would have been more natural if she had another contender to compete with who the small folk loved more than her. Varys' motivations would make more sense. Tyrion would not be as aimless or underutilized, and Dorne would support Aegon, showing their political ambitions. Not having Aegon led to a major lack of narrative depth and diminished plot lines for all those characters and families as a result. Jon Snow only had 3 potential partners, and all 3 of them had red hair. Ygritte in Season 3, Ross the prostitute before Season 1, and Melisandre in Season 5. But do you know who also had red hair? Catelyn Stark. So, does Jon Snow want to sleep with Book Catelyn? Probably not, but it is a bit of a coincidence he didn't want any relationships with a woman without red hair. What if Rhaegar had married Catelyn instead of Elia Martell, which does make more sense? The Riverlands have more men than Dorne, they are closer to King's Landing, and Catelyn was extremely beautiful. She also could have given him 3 children, since this is partly why Rhaegar ran away with Lyanna, because the dragon needs 3 heads or a 3rd child. Also, without the Riverlands, the Starks, Baratheon, and Arryns wouldn't have been able to link up during Robert's rebellion, since the Riverlands is literally what connects all of Robert's allies during the fighting. Moreover, Lysa could have been married off to secure an alliance for the Targaryens. Honestly, the fighting would have been way closer, and depending on whoever Tywin sided with, probably would have won the war in the end. But again, Rhaegar might not have run away with Lyanna in this version. Theon Greyjoy's uncle, Victorion, who was omitted from the Game of Thrones show, sails to Meereen to try and win Daenerys' hand with the Dragon Binder. The Dragon Binder is a magical horn that is said to allow its user to control dragons. As things stand in the books, Victarion and his Iron Fleet have just arrived in Meereen's Bay. However, instead of using the dragon horn to bring a dragon back to Euron, Victarion plans to use it to betray Euron and marry Daenerys himself, because Euron slept with his wife, and Victarion, in his anger, killed her with his bare hands. This is actually why Euron was banished from the Iron Islands. However, George R.R. Martin has admitted that Theon's uncle Victarion is as dumb as a rock, so his plan to marry Daenerys is not going to work. But he probably will succeed in stealing one of the dragons. Jaime mocks the Night's Watch, which is ironic, as it is an order similar to the Kingsguard in many ways. But at the same time, he is also the first character to tell Jon the truth about the Night's Watch, and may have even been counseling him. After all, Jaime joined the Kingsguard at around the same age, thinking it was a great honor, only to end up serving mad or drunk kings. So he certainly knows a thing or two. Arya's direwolf Nymeria actually plays a somewhat bigger role. In the show, Nymeria disappears in Season 1 and isn't seen again until Season 7, where she is seen leading a wolf pack. In the books, however, there are tales of Nymeria forming a massive wolf pack and terrorizing the Riverlands region. The wandering Septon, Maribold, tells Brienne, "They say the pack is led by a monstrous she-wolf, a stalking shadow grim and grey and huge. They will tell you that she has been known to bring Oryx down all by herself, that no trap nor snare can hold her, slays any wolf that tries to mount her, and devours no other flesh but man." Arya and Jon also have dreams about Nymeria, which could indicate the direwolf playing a role later on when Arya does eventually return to Westeros rather than what we saw in the show. There was a great irony in how the Mountain Sir Gregor Clegane became a knight in the first place. He was knighted by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen at the request of Tywin Lannister. without Tywin's request, Clegane would have likely never been a knight due to his past actions. So Rhaegar knighted the man who would go on to kill his child Aegon, and then brutally and murder his wife. Or the most honourable knight in Westeros knighted its most unhonourable. The story leads us to believe it was the Lannisters who killed Jon Arryn. That is, until Lysa Arryn reveals she poisoned him under Littlefinger's orders. However, George R.R. Martin did a great job deceiving the reader with the letter sent to the Starks at Winterfell and Pycelle's comments to Tyrion about being faithful to House Lannister. Because of this, there are some interesting interactions prior to Lysa's revelation that make more sense. For example, when Ned Stark tells Cersei Lannister that he knows the secret Jon Arryn died for, Cersei is genuinely confused because, although she knows Arryn knew her secret, she believed it was a fever that killed him rather than poison. That is why she responds with, "Is that why you asked me here? To pose me riddles." However, in the original outline, the Lannisters did kill Jon Arryn, but George R.R. Martin changed this because it was too obvious. It is obvious that Jorah and Illyroy never planned for Viserys to sit on the Iron Throne. Firstly, when Viserys announces his plan to slay Robert himself, Illyroy almost laughs out loud at that, since King Robert, even fat, would annihilate Viserys. Another is when Jorah tells Viserys to be patient when they were waiting for Khal Drogo to arrive. A lesser man may beg a favor from the Khal, but never presume to berate him. Viserys was not pleased with that statement. "Guard your tongue, Mormont, or I'll have it out. I am no lesser man. I am the rightful lord of the Seven Kingdoms. The dragon does not beg." Sir Jorah lowered his eyes respectfully. Illyroy smiled enigmatically and tore a wing from the duck. There are no more dragons, Dany thought. However, clearly Illyroy thinks nothing of Viserys' threats and only wants Fagon to be king. All the direwolves and their fates may match their Stark owners in the books. Jon is practically a ghost now. Sansa becomes Lady of Winterfell in the show. Robb and Greywind died at the hands of House Frey, whose sigil features Grey. Nymeria leads a wolf pack, reflecting Arya's role as a warrior, just like her namesake, Nymeria the Warrior Queen. Bran might represent summer fighting against winter, while a shaggy dog story known for a meaningless ending could reflect Rickon's fate. All the houses that have held Harrenhal have died out or met bad fates. House Hoare, Corys, and House Strong from House of the Dragon have all become extinct after holding Harrenhal. Moreover, Walder Frey once married a woman from House Went, later stripped off Harrenhal, who only gave him stillborns. Additionally, Jaime Lannister thinks that Pia, servant of House Went, is barren. Is Harrenhal's curse actually that it wipes out families and houses by making them sterile due to poison from dragonfire melting its walls? Arya, while serving as a cupbearer at Harrenhal, encounters a Frey squire who laments at losing the chance to marry a princess due to Robb Stark breaking the Frey-Stark marriage pact. Arya responds by stating she hoped the princess died. Little did she know the princess the Frey squire was referring to was in fact her. Yet neither of them knew it. Walder Frey basically told Robb Stark about the Red Wedding and what would happen before it actually happened. He tells Robb Stark, "Enough, you may weep and whisper after you're wed. Benfrey, see your sister back to her chambers. She has a wedding to prepare for. And a bedding, the sweetest part. For all, we'll have music, such sweet music, and wine. The red will run, and we'll put some wrongs right." Daenerys jokes to Sir Barristan that ruling requires iron cheek due to the discomfort of sitting for long hours. The next day, she finds her chair stacked with pillows. It's interesting to note that Aegon the Conqueror once said a king should never sit easy, which is why he commanded his armorers to forge a dangerous throne to sit upon. Is this going to foreshadow Daenerys and her cutting herself on the Iron Throne like it did to her father, the Mad King, Rhaenyra and Joffrey? Mance Rayder is not actually burnt to death. In the show, Mance is burnt alive by Stannis Baratheon and Melisandre at Castle Black. Mance is also burnt to death in the books. However, in this instance, it is actually the Lord of Bones. Melisandre glamoured Mance and the Lord of Bones to appear as the other, much to Jon Snow's shock. And so Mance is still alive, using the name Abel to rescue Arya, or Jean Poole, from Ramsay Bolton at Winterfell. The scene where Cersei Lannister talks with Tyrion about her worries regarding Joffrey's behaviour as the king is a show-only event. In the books, Cersei is much more crazy, demented, and paranoid, and would never trust, let alone confide in Tyrion, especially about her children. This is especially the case given the Valancourt prophecy that wasn't included in the show, where Cersei is extra paranoid about Tyrion as she believes he is the little brother who will end up strangling her to death. Where Sansa meets the Hound in a room during the Battle of Blackwater is very different in the books. The Hound doesn't want to save her. Instead, he actually puts a knife on her throat and is even ready to her, shoving her down on a bed and telling her to sing for your little life. He later tells Arya, "I should have her bloody and ripped her heart out before leaving her for that dwarf." In the end, Sansa's song actually changed the Hound's character arc and stopped him from being a monster, and this is the power songs can have on people. This is why George R.R. Martin called his book series A Song of Ice and Fire, because songs are such a powerful influence on society that can inspire us to do great good and evil. Daario Naharis did not sneak into Dany's tent while she was bathing. In the show, he is able to get past Dany's guards, including Sir Barristan and her Unsullied, to bring the heads of his accomplices. This either highlights how impressive he is, or how poorly Dany is guarded in her tent. That said, in the books, he was actually caught by the Unsullied and then brought to Dany in her tent. He is only spared because he has his fellow commanders' heads and pledges his allegiance to her. Balon Greyjoy dies much earlier. In the show, we see little of him after he's introduced in Season 2, and he is only later killed in the 6th season. This is 3 seasons after the Red Wedding, but Balon died before Robb in the books, with the Ironborn story barely being mentioned between those seasons. It highlights one of the many drawbacks of introducing Euron too late and not introducing Victarion Greyjoy at all in the Game of Thrones show. George R.R. Martin's favourite Targaryen is Daemon Targaryen from House of the Dragon. Rather than the likes of Daenerys, Aegon the Conqueror, Rhaenyra, or even Rhaegar Targaryen, Martin revealed the Rogue Prince as his favourite in an interview due to his love of grey characters. He's a notoriously bad character, a rogue in every sense of the word. He's very colourful and unpredictable character. I think he has to rank up there as my favourite. Littlefinger ordered Mandon Moore to kill Tyrion. In the Battle of Blackwater, Mandon Moore tried to kill Tyrion, resulting in Tyrion losing his nose. In the end, Podrick saved Tyrion, and we're later led to believe that Joffrey gave the command, but it was obviously Littlefinger who told Mandon Moore to kill Tyrion. This is because Tyrion knew Littlefinger was behind the dagger that started the whole Stark-Lannister war. Next, Mandon Moore, like Littlefinger, came from the Vale and was appointed by Jon Arryn. But Jon Arryn didn't like him, which meant Lysa Arryn must have recommended him, and Lysa would only recommend someone if Littlefinger told her to do so. Meaning Littlefinger has tried to kill Tyrion twice, once at the Blackwater and the second time at the Purple Wedding. However, Joffrey ate Tyrion's poisoned pie, which saved Tyrion's life. Was Daenerys Targaryen raised in Dorne? In one of her chapters, it was said that they lived in Braavos, in the big house with the red door with a lemon tree outside her window. The only problem is lemons cannot grow in the Braavosi climate. In A Storm of Swords, when Angui suggested eating food with lemons, Shanna replied, "Lemons? And where would we get these lemons? Does this look like Dawn to you, you freckled fool?" This, among other clues, suggests that Dani was actually brought up in Dorne or Essos. Roose Bolton gives Catelyn Stark a piece of Theon's skin delivered by Ramsay. The skin from the little finger of Theon Greyjoy's left hand. My son is cruel, I confess it. And yet, what is a little skin against the lives of 2 young princes? You were their mother, my lady. May I offer you this small token of revenge? Catelyn is happy deep down. Part of Catelyn wanted to clutch the grisly trophy to her heart, but she made herself resist. Put it away, please, she told Roose Bolton. Shae doesn't attack Tyrion when he sees her in Tywin's chamber. In the show, Shae looks to attack him first, which makes Tyrion's look like a case of self-defense. In reality, Tyrion straight up her in the books after seeing her on Tywin's bed. It's an important detail as it truly shows the beginning of Tyrion's descent into his dark side, which the show doesn't explore at all. It is so tragic what happened to Robb Stark's crown. When Jaime Lannister interrupts Ryman Frey while he's sleeping with the Queen of who is wearing the young wolf's crown, he orders Ryman to return home and hand over the crown. However, Ryman leaves without returning it and disappears on his way back. Ryman is later hanged, and when Brienne encounters Lady Stoneheart, she finds Stoneheart, or Catelyn, clutching her son's bronze crown. Tywin Lannister gave some sound advice to Joffrey when Tyrion threatens Joffrey after learning of the Red Wedding. Be quiet, Cersei. Joffrey, when your enemy defy you, you must serve them steel and fire. When they go to their knees, however, you must help them back to their feet. Elsewise, no man will ever bend the knee to you. Why did Tywin tell Joffrey this? It's likely a result of Tywin knowing what being too ruthless did to Aerys, who was left with no allies during Robert's rebellion. A large portion of the northern infantry, commanded by Tallet and Glover, both under Roose Bolton, attacks Duskendale for no reason. There, Samwell's father, Tarly, destroyed the entire force with his own army. This act more or less reveals Roose's treachery, as he had already decided to betray Robb Stark well before the Red Wedding. By deliberately sending them to Duskendale to be eliminated, the northern forces are severely weakened, while preserving his own Bolton forces sets the stage for the brutal betrayal at the Red Wedding. Robb even says of it, Duskendale, on the narrow sea? Why would they go to Duskendale? A third of my foot. Lost? For Duskendale? Robert Glover will answer for that when I see him, I promise you. However, it was actually Roose who gave Robert Glover the command. This is probably the biggest example of Catelyn Stark being a hypocrite. After Balon Greyjoy's death, Lord Bolton suggests Theon Greyjoy has great value being a captive king, hostage. Lord Bolton, I hope you are not suggesting that we free the man who killed my sons. Yet it was Cat who freed Jaime Lannister, despite him killing 2 Karstark sons, just like Theon killed 2 Stark sons. Jon Snow tells Stannis that his father, Ned Stark, died promoting his claim in King's Landing. It's the start of the Stannis-Jon relationship and, in many ways, gets Stannis to respect him right away. However, none of the Stark kids knew that Ned was an advocate for Stannis being on the throne. Ned only makes his discoveries about Robert's bastards in King's Landing, and with Jon being on the wall, there is no way he should know this. This is also a key reason why there was no Robb Stark and Stannis alliance during the War of the Five Kings. However, if Ned had just sent word to Robb to proclaim Stannis king, then Stannis probably wouldn't have killed Renly and instead travelled north to take command of Robb's army along with his own Dragonstone forces. Seeing Robb and Stannis work together would have been interesting. While Edmure Tully ended up becoming Lord of Riverrun again in the show, in the books he is currently on his way to Castle Rock as a captive of Jaime Lannister. After helping Jaime with the siege of Riverrun, Edmure is now set to be imprisoned for the foreseeable future. As Jaime notes, his wife will remain at the Twins until their child is born. Then she and the babe will join him, so long as he does not attempt to escape or plot rebellion. Edmure will live a long life. When Samwell suggests a democracy, everyone laughs him off, including Yara Greyjoy. This makes sense for most of the characters laughing. However, it doesn't make any sense for Yara, as that's exactly how people are chosen to become leaders in the Iron Islands. Although it's decided by captains, it is still a democracy, which is a lot more progressive than most of Westeros's feudal systems. And her laughing at the idea reminds us that she only became ruler after Euron died. Bran tells Sansa he can never be Lord of Winterfell. He can never be Lord of anything, as he's the Three-Eyed Raven. However, as we all know, he goes all the way to King's Landing to rule the Seven Kingdoms. Why do you think I came all this way? It's been memed to death by now, but why can he be one and not the other? It actually makes no sense. How did Jaime survive falling into the water during his battle with Dany after the sack of Highgarden? Bronn saves him and lifts him up to the surface, but realistically, Bronn wouldn't be able to swim up carrying a drowning man who was wearing armor like Jaime was. This was evident with how Mandon Moore died in the books after attempting to kill Tyrion. He was pushed by Podrick into the water and died as a result of the weight of his armor. Despite how important and crucial Tyrion is in the entire Game of Thrones story, we never get to see Tyrion interact with the likes of Ned Stark or Robert Baratheon. It would have certainly been interesting to see them interact with Tyrion, especially Robert, as one would imagine their love of drinking and as well as their distaste for Cersei would see them get along. Yet, we never get anything except a brief mention that Tyrion always liked Robert. How was the Red Wedding executed so well? One would think with so many moving parts, people in the know and the need to communicate with Tywin, it would be extremely hard to deceive the Starks and their loyal bannermen. In reality, only very few people probably knew about the scheme. This was perfectly summarized by Stannis in A Dance with Dragons when he discovered the Karstarks were planning to betray him. No, I believe them. Karstark could never have hoped to keep his treachery a secret if he shared his plans with every baseborn manjack in his service. Some drunken spearman would have let it slip one night whilst laying with a They did not need to know. They are Carhold men. When the moment came, they would have obeyed their lords, as they had done all their lives. It's very weird why Pycelle would help Ned Stark in his investigation by giving him the book of lineages Jon Arryn was reading before his death. Pycelle knew about the incest, and he could have claimed to have forgotten the book, or given Ned a different one. By giving Ned the book, all he did was give Ned the clues he would need to deduce Jaime and Cersei's secret. Tywin, despite never showing it, was probably so happy after Joffrey died. Ever since Joffrey called Tywin a coward for hiding behind Castle Rock while Robert Baratheon won the real war, his days were probably numbered. Since after the war was won, Tywin probably would have allowed Joffrey to get himself killed the same way he let Aerys almost get himself killed at Duskendale. With Joffrey out of the way, Tywin would have more control over Tommen, which would ultimately mean more years of true control. It's also interesting to note that Tywin was never really interested in finding out the killer, just more so looking to kill two birds with one stone by having Tyrion take the blame. If it wasn't Tyrion, it was likely Sansa, but Tywin never really made any arrangements to have her found either. Yara Greyjoy goes to save Theon Greyjoy from the Dreadfort in Season 4. This, however, never happens in the books. At that point, Balon is already dead, and Yara mainly resides in Deepwood Motte, which is ruled by the Iron Islands. What's more is saving Theon would likely not help her case if she wanted to rule, as he has a better claim to the Iron Islands simply by virtue of being a male. One big moment in the Season 2 finale of House of the Dragon is Helena's conversation with Aemond, where she reveals she knew what he did to Aegon, as well as saw future visions of his future death. This is show only, as she not only never has a conversation with Aemond in Fire and Blood, She is not even hinted to be prophetic in the first place. But after hearing this, why would Aemond ever go to Harrenhal or the God's Eye? George R.R. Martin regrets making the wall so big. It's 300 miles wide, but it's the height that was the real issue. After seeing how big it was on the show, Martin revealed he didn't realize how tall 700 feet really was when writing its description. Some fans have even calculated that a wildling shooting an arrow at someone on top of the wall would be physically impossible. There is a Maester conspiracy in Westeros. One of the most popular theories is that all the Maesters are in a conspiracy. The theory claims it is to eliminate magic and advance Andal culture in Westeros, promoting institutions like the Faith of the Seven while suppressing the First Men, Valyrians, and other groups. They are regularly manipulating history to portray magic as just simply a myth in Westeros. It's also interesting to note that Archmaester Marwyn believes the Citadel is behind the deaths of the last Targaryen dragon. Qarth is far more interesting, yet also mysterious. For starters, why is Qarth a wasteland, and what caused the Red Waste? Despite living in a hot region, why are its people fair-skinned? Why was it never conquered by the Valyrians? What is up with the three walls that seem to show Qarth was once surrounded by green lush? Interestingly, there are no details on Qarth in World of Ice and Fire either, with one of the editors, Elio, revealing George R.R. Martin refused to tell them anything about it. The spoilers are mostly hidden by having certain things he doesn't discuss very much, like Qarth and Meereen, because he thinks they are horrible places with the slavery and so on. And also because George would not give us anything about Qarth. A popular theory is that the red waste surrounding Qarth was caused by radiation. Why did Robb Stark not get any point of view chapters? Some fans have found it odd that a character as important as Robb, at least in the early books, never got a point of view chapter. George R.R. Martin has even said he regretted it, but then again, none of the 5 kings had point of view chapters. Perhaps this was so that the kings would be perceived from the viewpoints of other characters as well as not getting the reader to know their plans. Another theory is that it would have been more interesting to observe Robb from the viewpoint of Catelyn, who can offer much more backstory given that Robb is still just a teenage boy with little perspective. However, it was probably because George already had so many Stark point of views that Robb was the obvious candidate not to be given his own. The scene between Jaime and Tywin, where Tywin is skinning the stag in Season 1, is not in the books. In fact, Jaime doesn't have a point of view chapter until the 3rd book. Additionally, Tywin's motivations are made clear in this scene regarding the Lannister legacy, but it's much murkier in the books, where he wants to foster Sweet Robin, has an interest in Harrenhal, and has already hired 2 sellsword companies, which seems like he was preparing for war. Ned wonders why the gods make men so only to frown upon bastards. He then thinks of Jon Snow. However, after this, Ned then thinks of Rhaegar, but a frown. For the first time in years, he found himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen. He wondered if Rhaegar had frequented brothels. Somehow, he thought not. This seems to show that Ned has a somewhat positive opinion of the Prince of Dragonstone. Asha Greyjoy is less moral. For example, in the show, she questions how Theon could kill Bran and Rickon by burning them alive. Of course, she is unaware they are the Miller's boys. But in the books, she is angry that he killed them because they would have made great hostages for the Iron Islands. It's a subtle change that shows just how ruthless the Iron Islanders are, including a character like Asha. Stannis Baratheon wanted to ban all in King's Landing. Naturally, this never came to law, and he was laughed at. However, this also partly explains why Littlefinger, who owns a brothel and uses it for his own whispers and intel, was not a fan of Stannis becoming king when Ned Stark was suggesting it. In the end, Stannis lost the Battle of Blackwater, because Littlefinger procured the Tyrell alliance for the Lannisters and was willing to work with Renly, but never Stannis. One of the most iconic images of Robert's rebellion was Ned Stark entering court to see a dead mad king with Jaime sitting on the throne. An interesting fact is that you can't lie back on the throne because it'll cut you. This means when Jaime sat on the throne, it wasn't to catch his breath or take a break. He was actively sitting on it. In the original outline, Jaime would plan to make himself king because of this, but George changed it. Tyrion Lannister actually wants to sleep with Sansa Stark. He thinks to himself, I want her, he realized. I want Winterfell, yes, but I want her as well, child or woman or whatever she is. I want to comfort her. I want to hear her laugh. I want her to come to me willingly, to bring me her joys and her sorrows and her lust. Tyrion may have been forced to wed with Sansa, but in the books, he wasn't totally against the idea either. Natalie Dormer, who played Margaery Tyrell, didn't marry but entered into a civil partnership with her longtime partner David Oakes in a secretive ceremony in Somerset in 2023. The private event, attended only by close family and friends, was celebrated with espresso martinis and an intimate dinner. The couple began dating in 2019 and had a daughter together in 2021. David Oakes is a British actor best known for being in The White Queen, Victoria, and Vikings Valhalla. The Ironborn men under Theon's command are portrayed very differently. In the show, they don't respect Theon Greyjoy and barely listen to him. However, in the books, they tend to be some of the most loyal men in the entire book series. They actually obey and stay with Theon even when they know it will mean certain death. Theon even gives his men a choice between staying and going with Arsha, and they all choose to stay and die with their prince. Robb Stark was actually scared when Greatjon Umber threatened him. In the show, he shows no fear, whereas in the books, he later tells Bran he was scared Greatjon would kill him while looking pale and shaken. Gods, I was so scared. And the Greatjon's not the worst of them, only the loudest. Lord Roose never says a word. He only looks at me, and all I can think of is that room they have in the Dreadfort, where the Boltons hang the skins of their enemies. Robb is only 15 here, and he was right about Roose. Did Littlefinger plan the King's Landing riot? There are many aspects of the riot that point towards him. Mandon Moore, likely a Littlefinger stooge from the Vale, abandoned Sansa during the riots where Sansa is almost kidnapped. Aeron Santagar, the Master-at-Arms at the Red Keep, knew about Littlefinger's dagger and was killed during the riot. Most importantly, Littlefinger tells the Tyrells about the riots in detail despite not being there. Also, Varys wasn't there, so maybe he knew from spying on Littlefinger. Is Edmure Tully to blame for Stannis' defeat? When Tywin was fighting Robb Stark, Robb was trying to draw him into the west. However, Edmure makes a fatal mistake by attacking Tywin and preventing him from crossing the Red Fork, which causes Tywin to retreat. Tywin eventually heads south where he meets with the Tyrell army, and they later attack Stannis together. If not for Edmure's blunder, Stannis would have won the Battle of Blackwater, and the Lannister cause would be doomed with Stannis having so many important Lannister hostages. Stannis would probably force Tywin's army to bend the knee to him, or give Joffrey to Robb Stark to make the Starks and Tullys his, since Catelyn would have convinced Robb to accept the proposal to end the war with Stannis as king. Did Tywin sleep with Shae before Tyrion? We know Tywin was secretly sleeping with Shae after Tyrion's trial, but how long was this relationship going on? It's interesting to note that Tywin makes his camp around the inn where Tyrion meets Shae. Bronn found Shae and introduced her to Tyrion, and later on, Tywin is with Shae. So with all that said, was Shae a prostitute in the inn, and did Tywin sleep with her before Tyrion and his clansmen arrived? Jon Snow might be the only Stark child who follows the old gods, like his father Ned. Robb was married under the faith of the Seven. Arya and Sansa were brought up by Septors. Ned himself thought Bran could become a High Septon in the future, while he along with Rickon were also brought up by a Maester. Septs were built in Winterfell after Ned's marriage to Catelyn, and part of their marriage seems to have included introducing the faith of the Seven into the Stark household. Therefore, Jon seems to be the only one raised with the old gods as shown by him praying to them while at the Night's Watch. This is probably because the faith of the Seven was Catelyn's religion and she never invited him to join. Stannis has long held a grudge towards Robert as he was annoyed Renly was given Storm's End while he was given Dragonstone following Robert's rebellion. However, in the books, it's revealed that Robert wanted a strong lord in the Narrow Sea at Dragonstone to keep unruly bannermen and any Targaryen restoration from taking place. It was essentially a compliment to Stannis, but he took it a different way. Cersei also calls it a slight, but Stannis was the only one who Robert could trust with it. Jaime Lannister doesn't actually kill his cousin. Jaime's cousin accompanies him and Brienne to King's Landing and gets killed by raiders in the woods. Meanwhile, in the show, Jaime kills him to plot his escape. Kinslaying is a big deal in Westeros, and Book Jaime would never kill his cousin. However, like Euron bragging about killing Balon, the show didn't make a big deal about kinslaying. Euron may have tried to buy the Unsullied from Cranies at the same time as Dany. While Dany was negotiating with Cranies, the slavers shrugged. Tell her to consider quickly. There are many other buyers. Only 3 days past, I showed these same Unsullied to a Corsair king who hopes to buy them all. It is believed that this Corsair king is Euron, who may have been hoping to conquer the Iron Islands with this force. When Tyrion asked for his birthright to rule Castle Rock, Tywin is actually writing a letter in the show, and if you pause it, it appears to be gibberish. However, this could be code as Tywin was orchestrating the Red Wedding at that very moment. This scene took place in the very first episode of Season 3, and when paused, Tywin's letter appears to mention Winterfell being ripe for the taking. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, actually cries after his fight with Beric. Although he did end up winning and killing Beric, Sandor is actually in tears, likely due to post-traumatic stress from getting burnt. "Please," Sandor Clegane rasped, cradling his arms. "I'm burned. Help me. Someone. Help me." He was crying. "Please." Arya looked at him in astonishment. He's crying like a little baby, she thought. This part of the battle was not included in the show. Are the brave companions in cohorts with Dorne? It is interesting to note, Oberyn once served in sellsword companies while in exile, and maybe this included the brave companions who later betrayed Tywin by taking over Harrenhal, even though the Lannisters have more gold than the Starks. They are also the ones who cut off Jaime's hand and commit a lot of atrocities that turn the Smallfolk against the Lannisters, which creates the Sparrow movement. Joffrey Baratheon actually mentions Rhaenyra and virtually spoils the ending of House of the Dragon. This all takes place when he's giving a tour of the Red Keep to Margaery. Spoilers ahead. Joffrey says Rhaenyra Targaryen was murdered by her brother, or rather, his dragon. It ate her while her son watched. What's left of her is buried in the crypts right down there. However, this event doesn't actually happen in King's Landing. Did Jon Snow get Ygritte pregnant, and did Ygritte it? Jon and Ygritte had many times in the books, and so, logically, he probably should have gotten her pregnant. However, Jon was adamant he didn't want to father a bastard and even dreams of telling Ygritte this. It's interesting to note that Tormund also says, "You're bastard born yourself, and if Ygritte does not want a child, she will go to some woods witch and drink a cup of moon tea. You do not come into it once the seed is planted." This shows the wildlings clearly did have access to drinks that could babies. So maybe Jon could have ended up fathering a bastard, but Ygritte took care of it without ever telling him. In the books, she had no idea he was planning to betray them. Euron Greyjoy once possessed a dragon's egg. Whoa. The crow's eye sipped from his silver cup. "I once held a dragon's egg in this hand, brother. This Myrish wizard swore he could hatch it if I gave him a year and all the gold he required. When I grew bored with his excuses, I slew him." It is theorized Euron paid the faceless assassins with this dragon egg to kill Balon Greyjoy on the bridge, since he claims to have tossed the dragon egg into the sea. The roles are reversed, and it's actually Tyrion who is jealous of Shae flirting with other knights. One person in particular is Simon Silvertongue, who is a singer and later threatens to sing a song about him and Shae to Cersei. It is implied that Tyrion has Simon killed by Bronn and made into food. Bronn later refers to a pot shop in Flea Bottom that makes a savoury bowl of brown, with all kinds of meat in it, and Tyrion even refers to it later on a singer's stew. Did you know there is a crazy theory that in the books, the Long Night was actually a nuclear winter that caused a previously advanced human society that could build structures like Storm's End and the sand ship in Sunspear, which looks like a dun-coloured ship that was washed ashore and turned to stone to regress backwards to medieval technology. The same way societies became less advanced after the Bronze Age collapse in 1200 BC and the fall of the Roman Empire. Maybe humanity went underground and survived the nuclear winter, while the others are those humans who survived by adapting to the harsh cold left by the nuclear winter. Throughout Westeros, we learn of many underground settlements, which is maybe where the first men escaped to until the nuclear winter came to an end. George R.R. Martin has also written stories about societies that regress in technology in what he likes to call interregnums. Littlefinger barely has any private conversations with Sansa, unlike the show. Most of their dialogue in the show is actually Littlefinger replacing Dantas, who has a much larger role in the books, and has been orchestrating with Sansa well before the Purple Wedding. The lack of private conversations between Sansa and Littlefinger is what makes the reveal that Littlefinger was behind her kidnapping all the more shocking in the book, since Sansa is completely shocked he was the one helping her. There's an interesting detail regarding Qyburn and Dorne. As we all know, Oberyn Martell wanted revenge against Tywin, the Mountain, and Sir Amory Lorch. Qyburn handles the bodies of the first two, and is present at Amory's death in Harrenhal at the hands of the Brave Company. He happens to be the only one with some connection to all three men's deaths and bodies, which is a massive coincidence. Was he connected to Oberyn and Dorne, and is this all a part of the Dornish master plan? What if Jaime and Cersei Lannister were actually the Mad King's bastards? It's well known that Aerys and Tywin didn't like each other or see eye to eye, and it wouldn't surprise anyone if the Mad King slept with Joanna Lannister to get at Tywin. In such a scenario, it would also show pure irony, as Tywin would end up hating Tyrion, his trueborn heir, while loving and embracing Jaime and Cersei, who would have been bastards of someone he despised. Tyrion Lannister didn't know if Oberyn Martell would be his champion. In the books, Oberyn offered to be Tyrion's champion when they spoke in the cells, so he had some sort of guarantee that someone would fight for him. It's a key difference, and the show's representation may have even been more effective, as it shows Tyrion is essentially suicidal at that point, with no idea who would fight for him against the Mountain. When Lysa Arryn is killed, Sansa's shoe also falls down the moon door. Lysa's body is yet to be retrieved, but once it is, could Sansa's shoe also be found, and could it implicate her in Lysa's death? Of course, there's a possibility that from that height, the shoe flew miles away from the body. That said, it seems odd of George R.R. Martin to mention it, leading fans to wonder if it could be a potential plotline in The Winds of Winter. One of the craziest theories out there is that Mance Rayder is actually Rhaegar Targaryen. Here is the evidence for it. Both men like to sing. Both men ended up kidnapping a Stark girl. In the case of Mance being the fake Arya, music is mentioned a lot with both, and Mance has a red-black cloak similar to the colors of House Targaryen. However, it is extremely unlikely that this theory will turn out to be true. The Iron Islands and its king, Quellon Greyjoy, wanted to remain neutral during Robert's rebellion. However, after Rhaegar Targaryen's death, Quellon was convinced by his oldest sons to join the rebels. The end result was Quellon eventually dying at sea while the Iron Islands gained next to nothing. The immediate aftermath saw Baelon become ruler of the Iron Islands. Robert Baratheon was aware of Janos Slynt's corruption but chose not to get rid of him as he feared his successor would be worse. In fact, Stannis Baratheon also convinced Robert to keep him. Imagine the butterfly effect that could have been had there been someone else leading the City Watch who aligned with Ned Stark instead of Littlefinger. But it's also possible, like Robert feared, there could have been someone worse than Janos. The Tyrells are actually happy to have Loras as a Kingsguard because he can keep an eye on Margaery, and this was Littlefinger's plan. He talked the Tyrells into it so that one day Loras might walk in on Joffrey abusing Margaery and kill the king to create more chaos. Meanwhile, in the show, Loras is the only male Tyrell. In the books, Mace agrees to marry Willis to Cersei until the Queen of Thorns tells her son that Cersei is too old. Cersei mocks Tyrion for having to marry Sansa before realizing she has to marry Loras Tyrell. However, in the books, it's the other way around. Tyrion mocks Cersei for having to marry not Loras, but Willis Tyrell, who is a cripple. Tyrion, meanwhile, is actually happy to marry Sansa and is not against the idea, in contrast to the show, where he is adamantly against it. Who was the Knight of the Laughing Tree? The Knight of the Laughing Tree was a mystery knight who fought in the tourney at Harrenhal, who ended up defeating 3 knights whose squires were bullying Howland Reed. The Mad King wanted him unmasked only for the knight to disappear the next day. So, who was the knight? Many suspect it was Lyanna Stark defending Howland Reed's honor, who was bullied by some knights as squires. The mystery knight was also below average height, and Mira Reed was surprised Bran never heard of the story, which could imply it was a Stark. The show severely underrepresented the importance of Moat Cailin. Because of its location, Moat Cailin is a strategic stronghold as it prevents people from going north unless you're given passageway or hold the castle. Case in point, Roose Bolton had to smuggle himself through it to return to the north as the Ironborn control it in the books. In fact, the Ironborn strategy was to control Moat Cailin so that Robb's army south couldn't return home to defend their castles. Tyrion wants gratitude from Tywin for defending King's Landing and is irked that he never gets praised for helping the city. However, in the books, Tywin actually does give him credit, and the praise that means the most to Tyrion comes from the Tyrells at Joffrey's wedding. And cut off poor Tyrion's nose, Tyrion finished. Lady Lynette giggled. Perhaps you should be a singer, my lord. You rhyme as well as this Galion. No, my lady, Sir Garland said. My Lord of Lannister was made to do great deeds, not to sing of them. But for his chain and his wildfire, the foe would have been across the river, and if Tyrion's wildlings had not slain most of Lord Stannis' scouts, we would never have been able to take him unawares. His words made Tyrion feel absurdly grateful. Daemon is a proficient and dangerous war leader, whereas in the show, he was kind of a bumbling idiot. So, in Season 2 of House of the Dragon, Blood is a gold cloak that Daemon hires to assassinate Aemond. But in the books, Blood was not actually a member of the City Watch. Instead, he was a former sergeant of the City Watch who had lost his gold cloak for beating an to death whilst in a drunken rage. Daemon and Mysaria gave him and Cheese explicit instructions to kill one of Aegon's children and not botch the job by going for Aemond. This was more to send a message to the Greens that blood will be paid back for blood. Moreover, even though Blood got caught in the books, Cheese didn't, and there is a crazy theory that Larys, who uses rats, was involved in the killing of Helena and Aegon's son. There is no relationship between Grey Worm and Missandei. This is a show-only aspect which many book fans found strange since Missandei is only around 10 years of age and the unsullied can't have romantic relationships, only emotional. This is arguably what the show should have done. Instead of having Grey Worm being sexually attractive to adult Masandi, have them bond over their lifetime of slavery and share a deep emotional but not physical relationship. What if Jon Arryn was actually investigating Sweet Robin's parentage, not Joffrey's? In the show, we learn Jon found out the truth about Cersei's children, but what if he was actually investigating to make sure his son was not a bastard son of Littlefinger's? Then it just so happened he found out about Joffrey and the others. This would actually be really funny, since Sweet Robin is small and frail like Littlefinger, and not tall, strong, and robust like Jon Arryn. Jaime Lannister doesn't meet with Tyrion when he's under arrest or attend his trial. In fact, Tyrion has no idea if he's back in King's Landing, as Jaime only arrives after Joffrey's death. Tyrion actually wanted Jaime to fight for him in his trial by combat, but little did he know, Jaime was avoiding him and no longer had a sword hand. Instead, Jaime watched the trial in secret to determine for himself if Tyrion was guilty.
House Dane is one of the most mysterious and intriguing houses in Westeros. Their ancestral weapon is Dawn, forged from the heart of a fallen star, which many believe to be Azor Ahai's Lightbringer. However, no member of House Dane is allowed to just take the sword. Instead, they have to earn it. Otherwise, it remains unused despite being one of the most fabulous blades in the entire world. In addition, we don't have any knowledge of their house words. Interestingly, most members of House Dane also have either dark blue or purple eyes similar to Valyrians, but are older than Valyrians. One of their ancient kings, called Samwell Dane, and known as the Starfire, once burned Oldtown, who are probably the other most mysterious house in Westeros. These two houses also have Valyrian features. The Night's Watch members Pip and Garren die during the battle at Castle Black in Season 4. However, they are actually still alive in the books. That said, they're not with Jon Snow at Castle Black, as they are currently stationed at Eastwatch by the sea. It'll be interesting to see how they react to the news of Jon Snow's murder, and if they will rally the men of Eastwatch against the assassins. The response from Jon Snow when asked by Mance Rayder why he wanted to join the Wildlings, which was, "I want to fight for the side that fights for the living." However, in the books, he talks more about his treatment as a bastard, which isn't really a convincing argument, since Mance Rayder probably would have seen that Jon was treated well in Winterfell. The show arguably did a better job with its own version in this case. It is Jorah who says, "Blood of my blood," when Daenerys emerges with her dragons in the Season 1 finale. However, in the books, before Drogo's funeral pyre, Dany asks the Dothraki riders if they are willing to pledge their blood to her. They all refuse, saying they could never serve a woman, and that they plan to send her to Vaes Dothrak with all the other widowers. That said, when Dany emerges with the dragons, those same Dothrakis all fall on their knees and pledge, "Blood of my blood." The First Dornish War ended after 9 years when Prince Namor Martell sent a letter to Aegon the Conqueror in King's Landing. After reading it, Aegon, who struggled to conquer Dorne, was said to have blood dripping from his hands and then burnt the letter before going to Dragonstone and calling for peace. So, what was possibly written in the letter? The main theory readers have was that Aegon's deceased wife, Rhaenys, may have still been alive and was being kept hostage by Dorne. Perhaps they would keep her alive and well in exchange for Aegon's peace. And if he continued to war against Dorne, they would do unspeakable things to her as retribution, forcing Aegon to completely give up on his conquest of his Seventh Kingdom and even visit Dorne to constantly renew his peace with them and maybe receive word from her. Hardhome, the site of the old famous battle in Season 5, had a similar destruction to the doom of Valyria 6 centuries prior. The details are unclear, but many homes were said to have burnt. There were charred trees and burnt bones. Haunted by demons and ghouls, among others, while the wildlings never inhabited it again. This remains one of the big mysteries in the world of Westeros. What if Bran Stark ends up controlling Jon's body? Jon is currently dead in the books, with many readers theorizing that he has warged into Ghost. So what if Bran wargs into his body to merge his consciousness with the old gods to help battle the forces of ice and fire? It's only a theory, but it would explain how Bran potentially becomes king. However, with Dan and Dave not wanting too much magic and fantasy in the show, they decided to end the show with a Cersei vs Daenerys showdown instead. There are two cases of Catelyn Stark foreshadowing her own fate as Lady Stoneheart. After just surviving the mountain clans, she says, "We learnt that to our sorrow, Sir Donal," Catelyn said. Sometimes she felt as though her heart had turned to stone. 6 brave men had died to bring her this far, and she could not even find it in her to weep for them. Even their names were fading. The second instance was, the steel was polished to such a high sheen that she could see her reflection in the breastplate, gazing back at her as if from the bottom of a deep green pond. The face of a drowned woman, Catelyn thought. For those who don't know, Catelyn's dead body was retrieved from the Green Fork River by Arya Stark's direwolf, Nymeria, with Beric Dondarrion reviving her to become Lady Stoneheart. One of the biggest unsolved mystery is why Benjen Stark joined the Night's Watch, as it was never revealed to the reader. Was it because he was the third son in the Stark family with no marriage prospects? Then again, lords in Benjen's positions have always ended up marrying other noble houses. Or perhaps it was because he knew the truth about Rhaegar and Lyanna and kept it a secret while Robert's rebellion happened. And perhaps Ned Stark punished him for his silence by sending him to the Watch. A tradition with wildlings is that they don't name their newborns until they turn 2 years old. The main reason is that it is considered unlucky to name them before then, likely due to the harsh conditions beyond the wall causing infant mortality. So while Gilly's son is named Sam in the show, in the books he is still nameless. In fact, Gilly's son is referred to as a monster, as a milk name by Val. When Walder Frey goes to the Dreadfort to get married to Roose Bolton, some portions of the Frey army go along with her. This is because they are expecting their eventual child to be heir to the Dreadfort. Meanwhile, at Ramsay's wedding with the fake Arya, he says an interesting line. "Me, Ramsay of House Bolton, Lord of the Hornwood, heir to the Dreadfort. I claim her." By declaring himself the heir to the Dreadfort, one would imagine it caused some friction between the Boltons and the Freys. This might mean Ramsay was actually responsible for the death of the child Small Walder in A Dance with Dragons to force the Freys out of the castle to be killed by Stannis Baratheon. So after the battle, Ramsay can claim both Winterfell and the Dreadfort for himself. Jorah Mormont is less heroic and more of a creep. In the show, he is more or less a valiant ex-knight who happened to sell people into slavery, which led to his banishment from Westeros. In the books though, it's more clear that he wants to sleep with a 14-year-old Daenerys as he makes advances towards her. Additionally, he is far less handsome and older looking in the books. How Sam and Gilly came to have sex is much different compared to the show. For starters, they do it right after Maester Aemon's funeral, where Sam has had a bit to drink and it's actually Gilly who seduces him. It is at this point that we get the infamous scene where George R.R. Martin describes Sam's as a fat pink mast. Jaime Lannister recalls how Rhaegar Targaryen was planning some changes once he came back from the Trident. Rhaegar hints at this to Jaime before leaving King's Landing, where he would be killed by Robert Baratheon. But what if Rhaegar defeated Robert and the Mad King lived to fight another day? Well, Rhaegar probably would have usurped his father, the Mad King, by having a great council forcibly remove him. Evidence for this comes from theories that the tourney of Harrenhal was a scheme to overthrow Ares, who got word of it from Varys and attended the tourney to stop the lords and Rhaegar from plotting his forcible abdication. But then Rhaegar got distracted by Lyanna and devoted his time to her rather than overthrowing his father, which led to the downfall of the Targaryen dynasty. The Sand Snakes have yet to do much in terms of the story. While the show gave them prominent roles in Season 5, the reality is only 3 of them try to convince Prince Doran to rise up against the Lannisters, only for Doran to have them imprisoned. The real player in Dorne in the books is Doran's daughter, Arianna Martell, whose plan is to crown Marcilla to force Tommen and the Lannisters to war among each other, but fails and instead is sent off to potentially marry a Targaryen. Is Roose Bolton immortal? It's a popular theory with readers, and while it sounds silly, there is some evidence for it. Roose likes to leech himself. There's frequent mention of Roose not aging, though past 40, was as yet unwrinkled, with scarce a line to tell the passage of time. There was an agelessness about him, a stillness. Also, why does Roose not kill Ramsay when, in the books, Ramsay is such a liability? Well, the initial reason why Roose didn't kill Ramsay as a babe is because they had the same eyes. Maybe Roose is planning to take Ramsay's face the same way Arya and faceless assassins do. The Dreadfort is pretty close to Braavos, so it's possible Roose may have traveled there and learned the secret. The Boltons are known for flaying skin, and Roose Bolton's face is described as a pale grey mask. The reason why George R.R. Martin's books are taking so long to write is because he didn't include his 5-year time skip after A Storm of Swords or Season 4 of the show. Books 1, 2, and 3 all came out in 1996, 1998, and 2000. However, after abandoning the 5-year time skip, the 4th book came out in 2005, the 5th in 2011, and over 13 years plus for the 6th. This is because the 5-year gap in the story, which would have helped zoom past Arya and Bran Stark's training, and also aged up a lot of characters, many of whom are extremely young. However, Martin decided against it, as a time gap with repeated flashbacks afterwards would have been difficult for characters like Cersei in King's Landing and Jon Snow, who'd only just become elected. Daenerys Targaryen was almost poisoned by honey locusts in Meereen. It was a gift from her husband, Hizdahr, but Dany refused, instead letting strong Belwas eat them. Belwas gets ill and Barristan launches a coup to get Hizdahr, the prime suspect, removed from power. But it makes little sense in being Hizdahr, especially after Dany accepted his wish for the fighting pits to be reopened. Instead, it was likely Skahaz Mokandek, or Shavepate, the Littlefinger of Essos, whose lower-class noble family is hated by Hizdahr's. Some dragons can bond with their riders, but not all of them do. Why is this the case? We still don't actually know, but in a blog post, George R.R. Martin revealed, they bond with men, some men, and the why and how of that and how it came to be will eventually be revealed in more detail in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, and some in Blood and Fire. One cool theory is that the belief you can ride dragons is what allows you to ride them, not blood or magic. For example, Nettles is able to tame her dragon by feeding it mutton until it grew used to having her around. Then, after devouring a lot of food, Nettles took advantage of its sleepy state and took it to ride. She would do the same to Daemon Targaryen. What if Brandon Stark killed Littlefinger in their duel? Back in the day, Littlefinger, who was in love with Catelyn Stark, challenged Brandon to a duel for her hand. Brandon, of course, was a much better fighter who could have easily killed Littlefinger. However, he promised Catelyn he wouldn't do so. What would have happened if he actually did? Well, the butterfly effect would be that the entire Stark-Lannister war might not have happened with Jon Arryn still alive and Ned not traveling south. If Catelyn Stark didn't free Jaime Lannister, would Tywin have orchestrated the Red Wedding? Probably not. However, from Tyrion's point of view, we learned that Tywin basically thought Jaime was as good as dead after his capture. That was when he knew, Tyrion thought to himself, "You have given him up for lost, you bloody bastard. You think Jaime's good as dead, so I'm all you have left." What if Ned Stark was sent to the Wall instead of being beheaded by Joffrey? There are some interesting ripple effects if that actually happened. For example, does Robb Stark continue marching south? Does Sansa feel more favorably towards Joffrey for his mercy? Would Ned finally tell Jon Snow the truth about his parentage? And most of all, would Ned secretly tell the North to support Stannis' cause? Next, would Ned Stark go on the Great Ranging and tell Robb that the Northern forces need to reinforce the Wall? Imagine the Wall being reinforced with 50,000 Northerners and Jon convincing Ned that they need to let the wildlings through the Wall because otherwise they join the army of the dead. Meanwhile, Stannis, Renly, and Joffrey would be fighting for the Iron Throne with Daenerys invading later. What would have happened to Tyrion Lannister if Oberyn Martell actually beat the Mountain? Tyrion was imprisoned before later escaping to Essos after Oberyn's death. But had he won his trial, he would have potentially gone to Dorne with Oberyn and helped the Martells further plan the downfall of King's Landing and his own house. This could take the shape of Tyrion convincing Marcella that she should be queen and crowning her over Tommen, since Dornish law legitimizes the elder child as the heir and not the male. Or would Doran tell Tyrion to wait for Quentyn, in which case the Dornish and Tyrion would help Daenerys with her landing and invasion of the Seven Kingdoms? Lastly, would Tyrion try and seize control of Castle Rock as its rightful lord once Tywin dies? Could there be another Red Wedding? Jaime Lannister's cousin, Daemon Lannister, is set to marry a Frey. Perhaps the Brotherhood Without Banners, led by Lady Stoneheart, can use this as an opportunity to carry out a massacre of Freys and Lannisters. It should be noted that the Brotherhood already have agents infiltrating both Riverrun and the Freys, so they will have people who can let them in to perpetrate the massacre. However, that depends on what happens with Jaime and Brienne. Contrary to popular belief, Arya did not join the Faceless Men for revenge. While it may have been portrayed that way in the show, in the books, the real reason was because she was an orphan who had nowhere to go. Instead, she wanted to go to the Wall to be with Jon Snow. But the Braavosi ship captain refused to sail so far north, and so she went with him to Braavos, and only stays with the Faceless Assassins out of necessity. One interesting scenario that could have changed the course of history is, what if Catelyn Stark went back to Winterfell via boat after delivering the dagger to Ned? While in the show, she travelled by horse with Sir Roderick to King's Landing, in the books, she travelled by boat. If she had travelled back by boat, she'd have avoided meeting Tyrion in the inn. This would ultimately prevent her from capturing him and prevent Jaime from attacking Ned in the streets of King's Landing. Robert, as a result, wouldn't have gone boar hunting to escape all the squabbling, with Ned later being able to tell him about the kids without the need to alert Cersei. Or would Ned have allowed Cersei to flee the capital and then tell Robert? Which would be very interesting and lead to a Baratheon-Lannister war. So Willem Darry, who smuggled Daenerys and Viserys out of Westeros, signed a secret pact of alliance with Doran Martell between Dorne and House Targaryen in Braavos. The alliance was to be sealed by a marriage between Viserys and Princess Arianna Martell. Dani only learns of this many years later when Quentin Martel arrives at Meereen to propose a marriage between the two of them, given that Viserys was now dead. Could the plan now shift to Arianna possibly marrying another Targaryen in Aegon? Is it possible that the wall blocks off warging? Jon Snow stated he felt no connection with ghosts when he climbed the walls with the wildlings. Jon Snow states as much. Gods, woof, where have you been? I thought you died on me, like Robb and Ygritte and all the rest. I've had no sense of you, not since I climbed the wall, not even in dreams. More evidence for this comes when Orell's eagle burns while close to the wall, which Melisandre claims she did, but was actually done by the wall. Maybe this is why the others need the wall to come down, because like Jon and Bran, they warg not animals, but corpses, and while the wall stands, the White Walker's army of the undead cannot cross it. So they either have to go around it, underneath it, or have part of it destroyed. Why did Tywin Lannister never remarry? Everyone claims that Tywin loved his first wife, which it seems he did. But he also visited brothels while married to Joanna, and we know this because of the secret tunnel Varys tells Tyrion about. But maybe the reason he never remarried was because if he remarried and had another dwarf son, everyone would know it was his genes that made Tyrion, and he's the problem. If Maester Aemon didn't refuse the Iron Throne, he may have continued ruling Westeros going into a Game of Thrones as he ended up dying at the age of 102 in 300 AC. However, one could also make the argument that he may not have lived as long if he had to deal with the politics in King's Landing, and it likely would have brought down his life expectancy. But it's interesting to imagine how much more peaceful Westeros would have been under his reign. Arya's direwolf, Nymeria, is the one who pulls Catelyn Stark's dead body out of the Red Fork. Arya dreams of Nymeria doing this, but this was actually Arya walking into Nymeria at the time. So essentially, it was Arya saving her mother, who eventually becomes Lady Stoneheart after Beric sacrifices his own life to bring her back once finding her body on the riverbank. There is a great irony in Tywin Lannister's threat to Tyrion when he said, "The next I find in your bed, I'll hang." In the end, it was actually Tywin, hand of the king at the time, sleeping with a in Shay. And as we all know, Tyrion ended up choking her to death, which is similar to a hanging in that you are strangled to death, but instead of a rope, it was a chain. There is a fantastic theory that the strangler poison used to kill Joffrey was put in Tyrion's pie, and so Tyrion was the target. But Joffrey came over and ate Tyrion's pie. However, what if Littlefinger and Cersei were working together to kill Tyrion, and Littlefinger only implied to Sansa it was the Tyrells because he didn't want Sansa to know he had been working with Cersei? Then, when Joffrey ate the pie and died, Cersei went mad and repressed her involvement in this murder because it was too traumatic for her. It would also explain how she was the only one who thought Joffrey had been murdered, and only after checking his throat did everyone realize it was a strangler poison. Cersei's repression of the incident would explain why she didn't think about it in her POV chapters and why she suddenly starts to go insane. Could Sweet Robin cause Littlefinger's downfall? In the books, Littlefinger keeps underestimating him and is more than likely looking to replace him. That said, Robin and Sansa Stark are getting closer in the books. So could Sansa use her influence on Robin to help him defeat Littlefinger? Perhaps we see Sweet Robin finally getting to make the bad man fly, but not at the Eyrie, but at Riverrun instead. Many people complain that Dany is taking too long in Essos, and that she should invade Westeros by now. But what if George R.R. Martin is planning things in such a way that by the time she reaches Westeros, all the people she has a vendetta against are already dead? And with young Griff already in Westeros, a Targaryen already sits on the throne, eliminating any need for her to invade. So when she does invade, the Seven Kingdoms turn against her, and all of this could cause her to go mad. A Game of Thrones movie is in the works. There aren't many details to go by, but according to Variety, the project is in a very early stage of development with no filmmaker, cast, or writer attached to it. It'll be the first Thrones project to hit the big screen, especially as HBO avoided it with David Benioff and Dan Weeser's plans for Season 8 to originally end in 3 feature films. What if Jon Snow didn't go to the Night's Watch? What were his realistic options? Given that he's the bastard of Ned Stark, he actually had many options. He could have become Captain of Guards, Master at Arms, or a Master Hunter at Winterfell. He could be granted lands by Ned or Robb Stark, and even as a bastard, he could marry a noble woman. He could even study to become a maester, a sellsword, or join the City Watch in White Harbor. So Barristan was in the small council meetings with Robert Baratheon and knew Jorah was the one who informed them of Daenerys' pregnancy. However, Barristan didn't immediately reveal his true nature to Daenerys, or that Jorah had been selling her secrets. In the show, however, they had Barristan Selmy not in the small councils because Robert was afraid he might still be loyal to the Mad King, and then had Tywin send Jorah his pardon. Theon Greyjoy liked Sansa Stark and had dreams of marrying her. In a Theon chapter in A Clash of Kings, it said, "A pity Ned Stark had taken his daughter south. Elsewise, Theon could have tightened his grip on Winterfell by marrying one of them." Sansa was a pretty little thing too, and by now likely even ripe for bedding. But she was 1,000 leagues away, in the clutches of the Lannisters. A shame. Meanwhile, as Reek in A Dance of Dragons, Theon remembers when he thought Ned Stark may marry him to Sansa to claim him as a son. It's horrible to think that Theon might have forced Sansa to marry him in A Clash of Kings if she had not been down south when Theon took Winterfell. He might have even fled with her and taken her as his salt wife. Were the phrase actually baked into pies in the book? There's a theory that Wyman Manderley killed 3 Freys who ended up disappearing on the way from White Harbor to Barrington. He then baked them into 3 huge pork pies for Ramsay Bolton's wedding with a fake Arya. Wyman eats the pies himself, tells Abel to sing about the infamous rat cook, and even laughs when confronted by Hosteen Frey when he is told he'll be served all the bloody bits you can stomach. Outside of the Lyriods, the Baratheons were arguably the other major house most favored by the Targaryens. Orys Baratheon, the founder of the house, is believed to be the bastard brother of Aegon the Conqueror. There were 2 royal marriages between the houses, while there were an additional 4 planned marriages that never happened. Basically, Baratheons were almost like extended family for the Targaryens. Therefore, Robert nearly destroying House Targaryen during his rebellion was pretty much kinslaying. There's an interesting scenario if Jon becomes king in the north or Lord of Winterfell. How would Lady Stoneheart take the news? Would she care, as she's only after those who killed her and Robb, like the Freys and Lannisters? Or would she also go after Jon, since, as Lady Stoneheart, she has Kat's worst traits magnified even more, including her insecurities about Jon being a bastard son of Ned's? What if Balon Greyjoy actually accepted Robb Stark and Theon's offer? Instead of invading Winterfell, the Iron Islands would have instead invaded the Westerlands and tried to sack Castle Rock. With Tywin and his army dealing with Robb and the Baratheon brothers, Castle Rock would have been less guarded and ripe for the taking. It would have dealt a major blow to Tywin, and the Tyrells probably would not have allied with Joffrey otherwise. Cersei Lannister didn't want Ned Stark beheaded at all. While it undoubtedly helped her, in the grand scheme of things, it was a terrible move from Joffrey. She even complains to Tyrion about it, saying, "What was I to do? He called for Lord Eddard's head in front of half the city, and Sir Janos Slynt and Sir Illand went ahead blithely and shortened the man without a word from me. The High Septon claims we profaned Baela's sept with blood. after lying to him about our intent. What if Rhaegar Targaryen didn't cause Robert's rebellion? Since we know Lyanna Stark willfully departed with him, wouldn't it make sense for them to send a raven to avoid all the confusion? Or what if they did send a raven, but someone like Varys intercepted it and went on to spread fear in the Mad King that he was about to be overthrown by Rhaegar, making him even more mad? The reason is that it would destroy the Targaryens from within and help Varys, a theorized Blackfyre loyalist, eventually install young Griff on the throne down the line. This would explain why he tried to persuade the Mad King not to let Tywin into King's Landing, because he knew if he did it, it would be the downfall of Targaryen power in Westeros, and he wanted Mad Viserys to become king before young Griff would overthrow him. Jaime Lannister trains with his one hand with Ilyn Payne. In the show, it's with Bronn, and we get many comedic scenes and dialogue. However, in the books, we see a different dynamic as Ilyn can't talk as his tongue was removed, and he also can't read or write. This allows Jaime to get things off his chest and divulge secrets without fear of Ilyn telling anyone. Ilyn also smiles and taunts him during these moments when Jaime accuses him of sleeping with Cersei as well. Did the Lannisters inadvertently cause the destruction of Valyria? Septon Barth speculated on the matter, referring to a Valyrian text that had since been lost, suggesting that the Freehold sorcerers foretold that the gold of Castle Rock would destroy them. Interestingly, the Lannisters commissioned a Valyrian sword, Brightroar, a century before the Doom, but lost it. It was said that the amount paid for the sword was enough to raise an army. There's a theory that whoever sold it to the Lannisters used the gold to pay the Faceless Men to kill the sorcerers keeping the volcanoes in check, essentially financing the Doom. It's interesting to note that the Faceless Men originated among the slaves of Valyria, so they had all the reasons to help cause the Doom. In a Bran chapter in A Game of Thrones, it's mentioned how Theon Greyjoy had once commented that Hodor did not know much, but no one could doubt he knew his name. As we learn in the show, Hodor is not his real name. In fact, his real name is Walder in the books and Willis in the show. What's more is that ironically, it's Theon who ends up forgetting his own name as he now believes he is Reek. Is Cersei Lannister a massive hypocrite? She hates Robert for being drunk and adulterous, but is constantly drunk and adulterous herself. Not to mention, she even slept with Jaime before her bedding with Robert. She also threatens to kill Robert's bastards like Maya Stone if he brings them to the Red Keep, while raising her own bastards in the Red Keep. Finally, she complains about Tywin marrying her off without consent, then takes part in the same when forcing Sansa to marry Tyrion. Is Stannis Baratheon a massive hypocrite? He swears by duty, but he betrayed his king to back his brother Robert. He wanted to ban prostitution, but committed adultery himself. He burns Mance Rayder, but offered to spare him for being an oathbreaker, and he was also ready to have Jon break his oath to the Night's Watch. Planned to use Jon to usurp Sansa, and used a deceitful shadow baby to kill his brother. Tyrion Lannister planned on talking to Littlefinger about the dagger he framed him with, but never got to. When he returned to King's Landing as Hand of the King, Littlefinger laughed at his joke and Tyrion smiled back at him, remembering a certain dagger with a dragon bone hilt and a Valyrian steel blade. We must have a talk about that, and soon. He wondered if Lord Peter would find that subject amusing as well, and yet he never did, despite Littlefinger trying to have him killed on 2 occasions. Where are the Valyrians in the current Game of Thrones story? Lord Montfort Valyrion was the head of House Valyrion and allies with Stannis Baratheon in the War of the Five Kings. However, his contribution to the war effort is 4 ships showing their decline from the Dance of the Dragon days. Manfred eventually burns with his ships on the Blackwater and is succeeded by his 6-year-old son. Surprisingly enough, the Valyrians stay loyal to Stannis as Jon Snow sees their banners at the Wall. An interesting factoid is Arain Waters. The bastard of Driftmark is taken as a hostage after Blackwater. He bends the knee to Joffrey and is named Master of Ships by Cersei. He departs when Cersei has her trial and is now rumored to be a pirate king in the Stepstones. It is suspected he will help support Aegon now. There was a case of massive irony involving Theon and Arsha Greyjoy. When Theon first returns to Pike, he doesn't recognize Arsha. They do flirt with each other, but it's Arsha who does this rather than Theon in the show to see his true nature. When they meet again in A Dance with Dragons, this time it's Arsha who doesn't recognize Theon anymore because of his treatment as Reek at the hands of Ramsay Bolton. It is a really sad scene in the books. Aemon Targaryen mentioned how he failed to find the last dragon in the world and help guide them. Ironically though, this is exactly what he did through Jon Snow, finding him at the wall and guiding him to become a man of the Night's Watch. So little did Aemon know that his wish to help restore his house was fulfilled before his death. Is Tywin Lannister the biggest hypocrite in Game of Thrones? He told Tyrion, "When soldiers lack discipline, the fault lies with their Lord Commander," but takes no responsibility for Gregor Clegane's actions in killing Elia Martell and her kids. He also gives Tyrion grief over hanging out with but he did the same and slept repeatedly with Shae while knowing she slept with his son. He also gives Cersei a hard time about being unmarried too long after Robert's death, yet he refused to marry after his own wife died. We actually get a reaction from Robb and Catelyn Stark to Tyrion marrying Sansa. Robb learned of the news before Hoster Tully's funeral, but kept it from Cat. "If I could, I'd take his ugly head off. Sansa would be a widow then, and free. There's no other way that I can see." They made her speak the vows before a septon and don a crimson cloak. Catelyn, who eventually learns of the news, recalled when she sees Tyrion and almost had him killed. "I should have let Lysa push him out of the moon door. My poor sweet Sansa. Why would anyone do this to her?" Robert probably wouldn't have killed Jon Snow even if he was a Targaryen. The evidence for this comes from his regret for sending assassins to kill Daenerys, and the fact that the child would be half Lyanna, and if he really loved her and she told Ned she didn't want Jon Snow harmed, no way Robert would have killed him despite the threat he might pose to Robert's reign. There's no guarantee that the Children of the Forest created the White Walkers like in the show. Firstly, the White Walkers in the books are more complex than just being ice zombies, and there even appears to be a White Walker woman who activated the Winterfell weirwood thousands of years ago. It's also interesting to note that the others are said to have been in Westeros before the first men, as per the World of Ice and Fire. The history of the Stormlands stretches back to the Dawn Age, long before the coming of the first men. All Westeros belonged to the elder races, the Children of the Forest and the Giants, and some say the others, the terrifying White Walkers of the Long Night. Instead, the White Walkers might just be humans who had to adapt to living in the land of always winter. Varys is kind of a massive hypocrite, or a secret Blackfire supporter. He claims to only care for the realm, yet he kills and backstabs the few people who can make it a better place. The prime example of this is when he kills Kevan Lannister, Tywin's brother, who, unlike the others, seemed like a normal and just Lannister doing the right thing. He is also actively promoting war, violence, and anarchy, so Aegon Targaryen can successfully invade and conquer Westeros. Arya Targaryen probably had the worst death in A Song of Ice and Fire. Although we don't have too many details, we do know Arya Targaryen returned to King's Landing severely ill while on Balerion's back. She had bloody eyes, she was stick-thin with barely any flesh, and had a burning fever so hot the Kingsguard who carried her to the Maester could feel the heat from her through his armor. The worst part was that she had something inside of her, moving, possibly searching for a way to escape. Many believe these creatures were fireworms and that Aeria somehow contracted them when Balerion took her to Valyria. In the end, she was begging for death and got her wish when she was put in a cold bath and the worm shot out of her in a scene reminiscent of Alien. Tyrion Lannister is already on the descent to being a villainous character. In some fans' views, however, he has already shown signs that he was a bad person from the start. For example, when he returned from captivity in the first book, he walked past the corpse of a hanged Masha Haddle in Tywin's camp. She was the one who owned the inn at the crossing where Catelyn arrested Tyrion and was killed for that reason alone. With no remorse, Tyrion looks at her and simply says, "A room, a meal, a flagon of wine. That was all I asked," and shows no concern for her unjustified death at the hands of his father. Instead, once given power, Tyrion shows the audience who he is by killing singers and putting them into stews and threatening to have Tommen if he doesn't get his way.
There's no guarantee that Jon Snow kills Daenerys Targaryen in the books like he did in the show. In fact, this was virtually confirmed by D.B. Weiss, one of the Game of Thrones showrunners. I think the final scene between Jon and Daenerys is something we came up with sometime in the midst of the third season of the show. The broad strokes of it anyway. But there was a tremendous amount of pressure to get it right, cause we know that this is not a scene that's giving people what they want. Weiss also added that he and David Benioff planned 90% of the story for the final season well in advance, and even planned for the Iron Throne to be melted away. This is even more proof that the books, if they do get finished, will have a different ending.
Every king of Westeros has been crowned by the Faith of the Seven, by the High Septon in particular. So, theoretically, Renly Baratheon did have the best claim to the throne during the War of the Five Kings. He could have simply stated that his brother Stannis has taken up with a Red Witch, worships demons and practices blood magic for a foreign god, all in defiance of the laws of Westeros. Since the faith is what legitimizes the crown, and Westeros would never endorse the Lord of Light, perhaps Renly could have garnered further support if he went this route. We barely see major Game of Thrones characters die in actual battle. Of course, there are ones in the lore like Rhaegar Targaryen, Daemon Blackfyre, and Rhaenys Targaryen who die in combat. But in the modern A Game of Thrones story, the list is very minimal. The only major characters being Ygritte and Oberyn Martell if you count the trial by combat. It shows how George R.R. Martin prefers to have his characters die, not by battle, but by poor choices. Might Vargo Hoat have had the worst death in A Song of Ice and Fire so far? There have been many brutal deaths in A Game of Thrones, but Vargo Hoat, who is Locke in the show, has his hands and feet cut off by the Mountain's men and then fed back to him as roast goat. As each body part was cut off, Vargo would be bandaged to keep him alive and feel the pain even longer until his eventual death. The Iron Islands are portrayed as savages, poor and uneducated, but there's a lot more to them. For one, due to their sails, they likely have a more complete map of the known world. The Iron Islands are also centers of trade with Lordsport, its largest town being a commercial center for merchants in Westeros and Essos. They also have a lot of natural resources, such as iron and tin mines, while fishing and whaling are also big industries for them. Of course, most of the region is poor, which is why they resort to raiding. But it should be remembered that there are more to the Iron Islands than just the Greyjoys, and the show really failed to consider this since you can't have an entire civilization built upon raiding, and it was these houses that supported Arsha for Queen in the Kingsmoot.
The reason a Stark should always be in Winterfell is due to an ancient oath between Bran the Builder and the Children of the Forest. Perhaps if the long night comes, a Stark must be in Winterfell to either stop the wall from being breached or to stop the army of the dead. Maybe this has to do with why Starks bury their dead in the crypts, guarded by swords to ward off the dead or something.
As we know, Dawn was massively botched in the show, especially post-Oberyn. But some things just didn't make logical sense at all. The Sand Snakes went to avenge their father Oberyn, So their plan involves killing his entire family, like his brother, Prince Doran. Having later killed Marcella, they also did something which is entirely the opposite of what Oberyn would do. We do not kill little girls in Dawn. This is just among one of many reasons why Season 5 is the least liked seasons. Jon Snow's death is different than the show. In the show, the brothers of the Night's Watch killed him simply because they didn't like wildlings or how welcoming he was to them. Whereas in the books, Jon was actually breaking his oath by interfering in the affairs of the Seven Kingdoms by potentially dealing with Ramsay. Therefore, it made much more sense as to why the Night's Watch members killed him. Varys shows Tyrion Lannister the hidden tunnels that led up to the Hand's Tower, and notably tells him about how a previous Hand used them to visit brothels secretly. Initially, we're left to wonder who this Hand was. But after certain events, it appears more clear. This Hand was more than likely Tywin Lannister, as we learn he does like to sleep with as shown by Shay being on his bed.
George R.R. Martin recently provided an update on the Winds of Winter. In a recent interview, he said, "Unfortunately, I am 13 years late. Every time I say that, how could I be 13 years late? I don't know, it happens a day at a time, but that's still a priority. A lot of people are already writing obituaries for me. They're saying, oh, he'll never be finished." Maybe they're right. If we had to guess, we would say George will finish the Winds of Winter. Jaime Lannister was so annoyed at learning that Cersei slept with other men that at one point he didn't even rule out the possibility of Pain sleeping with her either. When Jaime confesses to Pain that Cersei has been cheating on him, Pain makes a crackling sound. Jaime realizes he is being laughed at and says, "For all I know, you fucked my sister too, you faced bastard. Well, shut your bloody mouth and kill me if you can."
There's a prominent theory on how Stannis Baratheon will defeat the Freys. It's called the Night Lamp Theory and references his time as Master of Ships, where he dealt with people who extinguished fire from a good beacon and eradicated a false beacon elsewhere to cause ships to crash into rocks. Similarly, the theory states Stannis will dig holes in a frozen lake covered with snow near the Crofters village and create a false beacon to lure Frey cavalry and eventually drown them.
Benjen Stark was actually in Winterfell during Robert's rebellion. As the famous saying goes, a Stark must always be in Winterfell, and this could also be the very reason why Benjen never married around this time. With Brandon having already died at the hands of the Mad King and Ned at war, there was always a chance of Ned dying. If that would have happened, Benjen would have likely been next in line to marry Catelyn as part of the Stark-Tully alliance. In the end, Ned survived and came back home, while Benjen would eventually join the Night's Watch a few months later for reasons unknown. Though, A World of Ice and Fire tells us Benjen was inspired by a Night's Watch member's speech at the tourney at Harrenhal and likely had his mind set on joining well before. But this seems like an obvious Maester lie.
Jon Snow is currently dead. However, in the show, Melisandre brought him back to life by simply using a ritual with no other consequences. But as we know from various events in the books, only death may pay for life. So what if Jon has warped into Ghost's body for the time being in order to stay alive? And what if Shireen eventually has to be sacrificed for him to return to his body? There's an interesting parallel with Tywin and Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion used a trick on the Mountain clans to save his life by wounding their pride and saying they hid from the Vale Lords before promising them the Vale. Later on, Tywin does the same thing twice. First to Tyrion by getting him to fight in the Vanguard, and later by getting the Mountain clans to fight in the Vanguard. If my son's men will not obey his commands, perhaps the Vanguard is not the place for him. No doubt he'll be more comfortable in the rear, guarding our baggage train. Tyrion responded, "Do me no kindness, father. If you have no other command to offer me, I'll lead your van." This shows Tyrion really is his father's son, but also how poor a player Tyrion is as he fell for the same trick that he used.
Actor for Pain, Wilko Johnson, was diagnosed with terminal cancer of the pancreas in 2013. He was told he would only survive until October of that same year. This is a major reason why we never see Pain in the show beyond Season 2, and why he hasn't been mentioned since Season 4.
In fact, the scene with a one-handed Jaime Lannister sparring with Bronn was actually Jaime sparring with pain in the books. Johnson would eventually be cured but never returned to the show, and so Payne never actually died and just remained an off-screen character. It would have been funny if he just randomly showed up in Season 8 during the Battle of King's Landing for a quick cameo. Sadly, Wilko Johnson passed away in 2022, 3 years after the show's conclusion.
Stannis Baratheon had nightmares of Renly's death. He tells Davos, "I dream of it sometimes, of Renly's dying, a green tent, candles, a woman screaming, and blood." He also talks of how Renly bringing out the peach during their meeting vexed him. He brought his doom on himself with his treason. But I did love him, Davos. I know that now. I swear, I will go to my grave thinking of my brother's peach.
Sir Barristan Selmy says of Robert Baratheon, "If I had seen him smile over the red ruins of Rhaegar's children, no army on this earth could have stopped me from killing him." Of course, Barristan wasn't there as he was injured from the battle at the Trident. Obviously, Robert didn't smile, but he definitely was relieved that such a job was carried out by Tywin Lannister's men. As for whether Barristan would be able to kill a prime Robert, we think the answer would be a yes. Did Elia Martell have the worst death in A Song of Ice and Fire? With the sack of King's Landing taking place, Sir Amory Lorch killed Elia's daughter, Princess Rhaenys, by stabbing her 50 times. The Mountain then murdered her son, Prince Aegon, by smashing his head against a wall. And then, of course, the Mountain proceeded to rape Elia, already traumatized by witnessing her son's death, before smashing Elia's head in the same way. There are some slight changes in dialogue in the scene where Robert Baratheon slaps Cersei Lannister. For one, prior to that moment when they're discussing Ned Stark's battle with Jaime Lannister, Cersei accuses him of visiting a brothel, to which Ned responds that he visited Robert's bastard daughter, Bara. However, Cersei irks Robert further by stating that if Ned dared to speak to a Targaryen king the same way he spoke to Robert, things would be different, to which Robert replies angrily, "Do you take me for the Mad King?" There's an interesting conversation between Jon Snow and Jeor when the former finds out that Ned Stark is accused of being a traitor. When Jon asks if Joffrey would listen to Jeor and possibly send Ned to the Wall, Jeor says, "A pity the dwarf isn't with them. He's the lad's uncle, and he saw our need when he visited us. It was a bad thing, your lady mother taking him captive." Jon interrupts him to sharply reply, "Lady Stark is not my mother." Jon even regarded Tyrion as a friend now and thought that if Ned ended up dying, Catelyn would be as much to blame as the Queen. Which kind of goes to show that Catelyn's dislike of Jon was mutual, and her taking Tyrion did screw over Ned. Sansa Stark makes a reference to Aemon the Dragon Knight Targaryen. Aemon was the son of Viserys, the second Targaryen, who was son to Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen. He was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and referred to by many as the noblest knight to have ever lived. Because of his Kingsguard duties, he couldn't marry, but he loved his sister, Queen Nerys, and they were even rumoured to be lovers. And so when Sansa begs her father Ned to remain in King's Landing at the start of A Game of Thrones, she mentions how she loved Joffrey as much as Nerys loved Aemon, and wants to be his queen and have his babies. "Sweet one," her father said gently, "listen to me. This match with Joffrey was a terrible mistake. That boy is no Prince Aemon, you must believe me." Sir Barristan Selmy regrets saving the king at Duskendale. During this time, the Mad King was not truly mad. He only became mad from paranoia after this incident where he was held captive by Lord Dennis Darklyn. But after what Barristan had to see during the last years of the Mad King, he wondered, the king might well have died there as Tywin Lannister sacked the town. Then Prince Rhaegar would have ascended the Iron Throne, mayhaps to heal the realm. Duskendale had been his finest hour, yet the memory tasted bitter on his tongue. If Rhaegar Targaryen had become king, then he probably would have ruled well and been able to keep the Seven Kingdoms in check, unlike his father. However, would he still have kidnapped Lyanna while king like he did as a prince? Why didn't Lord Varys flee during the sack of King's Landing? One explanation could be he supplied Robert with crucial information or sold out information from the current regime to save his skin. Or maybe Varys did flee in his own way by hiding in the secret passages only he knows of and coming out when everything was safe before pledging fealty to Robert, a man known for handing out pardons. Cersei Lannister makes a reference to Ashara Dayne, who she believes to be the mother of Jon Snow. Ashara, sister to Arthur Dayne, jumped to her death shortly after Robert's rebellion when Ned delivered Arthur's sword to Starfall. Many believe Ned and Ashara had feelings for each other, and while it's all but confirmed that Jon Snow is Rhaegar and Lyanna's son, theories still remain that Ashara may be Jon's real mother. And so, when Ned confronts Cersei about her children, Cersei eventually gets offended and says, "You've a bastard of your own, I've seen him. Who was the mother, I wonder? Some Dornish peasant you r***ed while her holdfast burned? A whore? Or was it the grieving sister, the Lady Ashara? She threw herself into the sea, I'm told. Why was that? For the brother you slew, or the child you stole?" When Jon Snow learned from Jeor Mormont that Ned Stark was accused of being a traitor, Jon initially refused to believe it. However, a faint doubt lingered within him. Lord Eddard Stark would never dishonor himself, would he? Jon thought. He fathered a bastard, a small voice whispered inside him. Where was the honor in that? And your mother, what of her? He will not even speak her name. Catelyn Stark actually tried to help prevent her brother Edmure Tully from having to marry a Frey. When the terms were laid out to Robb and the Tullys, Catelyn said, "My brother has just lost his own father. He needs time to mourn." "Roslyn is a cheerful girl," replied Lothar Frey. "She may be the very thing Lord Edmure needs to help him through his grief. And my grandfather has come to mislike lengthy betrothals," the bastard Walder Rivers added. "I cannot imagine why." Tywin Lannister was actually against Janos Slynt becoming Lord of Harrenhal. During his War Council meeting with Tyrion, Tywin says, "Whose notion was it to make this Janos Slynt a lord? The man's father was a butcher, and they grant him Harrenhal. That was the seat of kings, not that he will ever set foot inside it if I have a say. I am told he took a bloody spear for his sigil. A bloody cleaver would have been my choice." Following Ned Stark's execution, Sansa's next interaction with Joffrey was in her room, which was not included in the show, where she tells him, "I only want to go home, as it please you." She finished weakly. "It does not please me," Joffrey said. "Mother says I'm still to marry you, so you'll stay here and you'll obey." Sansa wailed, "I don't want to marry you. You chopped off my father's head." Joffrey replies, "He was a traitor. I never promised to spare him, only that I'd be merciful, and I was. If he hadn't been your father, I would have had him torn or flayed, but I gave him a clean death." Sansa later whispers, "I hate you," which leads to Joffrey ordering Sir Meryn Trant to strike her. It is after this scene where Joffrey takes Sansa to see Ned's head on a spike. Daenerys Targaryen was actually ready to forgive Jorah Mormont for spying on her and not telling her the truth. However, a combination of Jorah being a bit too forthcoming with his crush on her, attempting to turn Dany against her new allies in Essos, and simply being unapologetic and not begging for forgiveness sealed the deal for his exile. No, he shook his head. "I never meant, forgive me, you have to forgive me." Have to? It was too late. He should have begun by begging forgiveness. She could not pardon him as she'd intended. "I can't forgive you," she said. "You forgave the old man. He lied to me about his name. You sold my secrets to the men who killed my father and stole my brother's throne." When Tywin and Tyrion Lannister discuss their dire situation being surrounded by 3 armies with Jaime taken hostage, Tywin says, "My daughter commands us to ride for King's Landing at once, to defend the Red Keep against King Renly and the Knight of Flowers." His mouth tightened. Commands us, mind you, in the name of the king and council. "How is King Joffrey taking the news?" Tyrion asked with a certain black amusement. "Cersei has not seen fit to tell him yet," Lord Tywin said. "She fears he might insist on marching against Renly himself." "With what army?" Tyrion asked. "You don't plan to give him this one, I hope." "He talks of leading the city watch," Lord Tywin said. "If he takes the watch, he'll leave the city undefended," Sir Kevan said, "and with Lord Stannis on Dragonstone." Joffrey versus Renly would have been so cool to see. Sansa was the one to betray her father to Queen Cersei. You are innocent of any wrong, we all know that, and yet you are the daughter of a traitor. How can I allow you to marry my son? But I love him, Sansa wailed, confused and frightened. What did they mean to do to her? It was not supposed to happen this way. She had to wed Joffrey. They were betrothed. He was promised to her. She had even dreamed about it. It wasn't fair to take him away from her on account of whatever her father might have done. How well I know that child, Cersei said, her voice so kind and sweet. Why else should you have come to me and told me of your father's plan to send you away from us, if not for love? This led to Ned's downfall. Night's Watch Lord Commander Jorah Mormont actually expected Jon Snow to flee Castle Black once he learned that Ned Stark had been executed. If truth be told, we expected you to do just as you did, Mormont said. I ordered a watch kept over you. You were seen leaving. If your brothers had not fetched you back, you would have been taken along the way and not by friends, unless you have a horse with wings like a raven. Do you? There is very little chance that Jon Snow will kill Daenerys with a knife, especially given that showrunner D.B. Weiss even confirmed the final scene between Jon and Dany was something they came up with during the 3rd season of the show. There is some potential foreshadowing to this moment. It comes from Robert Baratheon when he is plotting to have Dany assassinated. He says to Ned, a knife perhaps. A good sharp one and a bold man to wield it. Robert Baratheon reveals to Ned Stark how he planned on numerous occasions to give up on the throne and just head to Essos. The only thing stopping him was the thought of Joffrey on the throne with Cersei whispering into his ear. Let me tell you a secret, Ned. More than once I have dreamed of giving up the crown, take ship for the free cities with my horse and my hammer, spend my time warring and whoring. That's what I was made for, the sellsword king, how the singers would love me. You know what stops me? The thought of Joffrey on the throne, with Cersei standing behind him. How could I have made a son like that, Ned? There's an interesting case of potential foreshadowing from Jon Snow during the battle with the wildlings. We should have 20 trebuchets, not 2, and they should be mounted on sledges and turntables so we could move them. It was a futile thought. He might as well wish for another 1,000 men, and maybe a dragon or 3. Ironically, this is exactly what the show had happened against the White Walkers. When Ned Stark found out Summer saved Bran's life, he started feeling guilty about killing Lady and wondered if he committed some grave mistake. He thought to himself, your children were meant to have these pups, my lord. And he had killed Sansa's. And for what? If the gods had sent these wolves, what folly had he done? It would have been interesting if the girls had their direwolves while in King's Landing, especially when the Lannisters attacked the Stark forces during the failed coup. Robb Stark was ready to kill Jaime Lannister himself when he found out he may be behind Bran's fall. That was only until Sir Roderick knocked some sense into the young Stark. Gods, Robb swore, his young face dark with anger. If this is true, he will pay for it. He drew his sword and waved it in the air. I'll kill him myself. Sir Roderick bristled at him. Put that away. The Lannisters are 100 leagues away. Never draw your sword unless you mean to use it. The scene with the attempted assassination of Bran goes a bit different. After Summer saves Bran and kills the assassin, Catelyn, earlier doubtful of the direwolves, whispered, "Thank you." The wolf padded closer, sniffed at her fingers, then licked all the blood off her hand. It turned away silently and jumped up on Bran's bed and lay down beside him. Catelyn began to laugh hysterically. The laugh was not included in the show. This is the same laugh she would give when dying in the books. While Stannis Baratheon certainly had some respect for Ned Stark, he was also bitter towards him, and saw no reason to avenge him despite Maester Cressen's suggestion to team up with Robb Stark. Why should I avenge Eddard Stark? The man was nothing to me. Oh, Robert loved him to be sure. Loved him as a brother. How often did I hear that? I was his brother, not Ned Stark. But you would never have known it by the way he treated me. I sat on his council for 15 years, helping Jon Arryn rule his realm while Robert drank and whored. But when Jon died, did my brother name me his hand? No, he went galloping off to his dear friend Ned Stark and offered him the honor. And small good it did, either of them. It is tragic to think what a Stannis-Ned Stark alliance would have looked like at the end of a Game of Thrones, with Ned declaring Stannis king and rallying the North behind him. We actually get a reaction from Joffrey Baratheon to the death of Viserys Targaryen at Joffrey's name day celebration. He tells Sansa that the king is dead, and Sansa fears he is talking about Robb, but Joffrey says, Viserys, the last son of Mad King Aerys. He's been going about the free cities since before I was born, calling himself a king, Joffrey informed Sansa. Well, Mother says the Dothraki finally crowned him, with molten gold. That's funny, don't you think? The dragon was their sigil. Joffrey then mocked Robb Stark. It's almost as good as if some wolf killed your traitor brother. Maybe I'll feed him to wolves after I've caught him. Did I tell you I intend to challenge him to single combat? To that, Sansa replied, I should like to see that, Your Grace, before thinking more than you know. Catelyn Stark was testing Robb's ability as a future king early on, right after Bran was nearly assassinated. She quizzed him on why someone would kill Bran. After thinking about it for a few minutes, Robb replied, someone is afraid Bran might wake up, afraid of what he might say or do, afraid of something he knows. Catelyn was proud of him. Very good. When later deciding what to do about guarding Bran, Cat says, so long as Lord Eddard is away, my son is the master of Winterfell. Robb stood a little taller. Put one man in the sick room, night and day, one outside the door, two at the bottom of the stairs. No one sees Bran without my warrant or my mother's. In the books, Robb is 14 and still trying to prove himself as a future Lord of Winterfell, whereas in the show, he was already a stoic young man ready for leadership. Catelyn Stark places the blame on herself for Ned Stark's death. However, it wasn't because she took Tyrion Lannister as a hostage, but rather convincing Ned to serve as Robert's hand in the first place when he was having doubts about going. Living men had gone south, and cold bones would return. Ned had the truth of it, she thought. His place was at Winterfell, he said as much. But would I hear him? No. Go, I told him. You must be Robert's hand for the good of our house, for the sake of our children. My doing, mine, no other. When Catelyn Stark went to meet with Renly Baratheon in Bitterbridge, it was the first time she was seeing him since he was a boy of Bran's age. When she eventually observes him, she essentially comes to the conclusion that he is the second coming of Robert Baratheon. Small wonder the lords gather around him with such fervour, she thought. He is Robert come again. Renly was handsome as Robert had been handsome, long of limb and broad of shoulder, with the same coal-black hair, fine and straight, the same deep blue eyes, the same easy smile. The slender crown around his brows seemed to suit him well. Cersei Lannister threatens Tyrion's life by stating a piece of paper from Tywin, naming him Hand of the King, wouldn't protect him the same way Ned Stark having a piece of paper didn't save him. Tyrion did not reply, but believed he was much safer than Ned for a number of reasons. Eddard Stark did not have the city watch, Tyrion thought, nor my clansmen, nor the sellswords that Bronn has hired. I do, or so he hoped, trusting in Varys, in Sir Jacelyn Bywater, in Bronn. Unlike in the show, Tyrion's mountain clansmen accompany him in King's Landing, while Janos Slynt's replacement, Jacelyn Bywater, was brave, honourable, and on good terms with Tyrion, so at the very least he did have more protection than Ned ever did. However, the main thing keeping Tyrion alive was Tywin, since if anyone killed Tyrion and got caught, they would have to answer to Tywin and his army. There's an annoying habit of Theon Greyjoy's that Catelyn Stark never liked. When Robb Stark was reading out his peace terms to Cleos Frey and revealed Jaime Lannister would remain a hostage to ensure Tywin behaved, Theon smiled. Catelyn studied Theon Greyjoy's sly smile, wondering what it meant. That young man had a way of looking as though he knew some secret jest that only he was privy to. Catelyn had never liked it. Bran had thought the exact same thing of Theon's smile, and so did Ramsay. Renly Baratheon was hoping that Sir Barristan Selmy would have offered his services to him. When meeting with Catelyn Stark, Renly asked if he had arrived at Riverrun. The Lannisters told him he was too old and gave his cloak to the Hound. I'm told he left King's Landing vowing to take up service with the true king. That cloak Brienne claimed today was the one I was keeping for Selmy, in hopes that he might offer me his sword. When he did not turn up at Highgarden, I thought perhaps he had gone to Riverrun instead. When Kat replies that they haven't seen him, Renly says, "He was old, yes, but a good man still. I hope he has not come to harm. The Lannisters are great fools." This is yet another example of how stupid Cersei was for getting rid of him, and a showcase of Barristan's reputation across the realm. Tyrion explained the full story in detail to Bronn about his first wife, Tysha. A drunk Septon married them off, and Tyrion, 13 years of age, originally kept it a secret by setting up a cottage of his own. However, the Septon sobered up and told Tywin, which resulted in him having Jaime lie that she was. Tywin then had his Lannister guards force themselves on her, with each of them providing a silver coin to pay for her services, while Tyrion was forced to watch. In the end, Tyrion had to go last and paid her with a gold coin given by Tywin because he was a Lannister. To all of that, Bronn replies, 13 or 30, I would have killed the man who did that to me. Sadly, as we find out in Book 3, Tysha wasn't a. There's a moment of tension between Robb and Catelyn Stark in a clash of kings. It was when Robb said he wouldn't free Jaime Lannister even for Arya or Sansa. Her son was looking down at her, Catelyn realized. Was it war that made him grow so fast, she wondered, or the crown they had put on his head? Are you afraid to have Jaime Lannister in the field again? Is that the truth of it? Edmure Tully came to Robb's defense, but received Robb's wrath after accidentally calling him a boy. Robb later says, I might have been able to trade the Kingslayer for father, but not for the girls? Catelyn asked in an icy, quiet voice. Girls are not important enough, are they? Robb made no answer, but there was hurt in his eyes. She had wounded him, but he was too much his father's son to admit it. There's a Kingsguard member who was cut from the show named Aerys Oakheart. Unlike Sir Meryn Trant, he was actually a noble Kingsguard member and even complimented Sansa Stark on her appearance on Joffrey's name day as he was escorting her. In fact, Sansa preferred him over anyone else. Aerys Oakheart was courteous and would talk to her cordially. Once he even objected when Joffrey commanded him to hit her. He did hit her in the end, but not hard as Sir Meryn or Sir Boros might have, and at least he had argued. It is Sir Alistair Thorne of the Night's Watch who goes to King's Landing hoping to bring attention to the return of the others. Sadly, he could only meet with Tyrion Lannister instead of Joffrey, who offered him some hungry mouths from King's Landing as potential recruits. Do you think I sailed all the way from Eastwatch by the Sea to be mocked by the likes of you? He fumed, blocking the way. This is no jape. I saw it with my own eyes, I tell you, the dead walk. You should try to kill them more thoroughly, Tyrion replied. When Thorne couldn't get closer to Tyrion, he shouted, You are a fool, imp. Despite his jabs, Tyrion actually did consider the threat of the dead after travelling to Castle Black earlier, but had a hard time fully believing it. Sadly, the rotten hand Alistair brought with him had melted, because Tyrion made him wait a long time before seeing him out of spite. Catelyn Stark showed some resentment towards Renly Baratheon for not helping Ned out in King's Landing. Renly says, Had Ned listened, he would be regent today, and there would have been no need for me to claim the throne, Renly told Cat. He had sworn to protect Robert's children. I lacked the strength to act alone, so, when Lord Eddard turned me away, I had no choice but to flee. Had I stayed, I knew the Queen would see to it that I did not long outlive my brother. To that, Catelyn thought, had you stayed and lent your support to Ned, he might still be alive. After Balon Greyjoy derided Theon for wearing clothes and ornaments not bought with the iron price, Theon considered what he could have taken in the past for the iron price only to come to his own sudden realization. No ornament, he had nothing bought with iron. I might have taken something off that wildling I killed to save Bran Stark, but he had nothing worth the taking. That's my cursed luck, I kill the poor. Which is kind of a funny line. How did Daenerys Targaryen react to the news of Robert Baratheon dying in the books? She was actually informed about it by a Summer Islander. Dead? She repeated. In her lap, Drogon hissed, and pale smoke rose before her face like a veil. You are certain? The usurper is dead? Dany later thinks, he sent me poisoned wine, yet I live and he is gone. Dany had never looked upon the usurper's face, yet seldom a day had passed when she had not thought of him. His great shadow had lain across her since the hour of her birth. "The boy sits the Iron Throne now," Ser Jorah said. "King Joffrey reigns," the Summer Islander agreed, "but the Lannisters rule. Robert's brothers have fled King's Landing. The talk is they mean to claim the crown. And the hand has fallen. Lord Stark, who was King Robert's friend, he has been seized for treason." "Ned Stark a traitor?" Ser Jorah snorted. "Not bloody likely." When Arya Stark was prisoner at Harrenhal under the Mountain and his men, she was actually happy she didn't have Needle with her. After seeing one of the imprisoned girls beheaded by the Mountain for throwing a rock at his men, Arya glanced sidelong at Needle, sheathed at the hip of a black-bearded, balding man-at-arms called Polliver. It's good that they took it away, she thought. Otherwise, she would have tried to stab Sir Gregor and he would have cut her right in half, and the wolves would eat her too. These were Tyrion Lannister's terms to Robb Stark, King of the North. He says, Robb Stark must lay down his sword, swear fealty, and return to Winterfell. He must free my brother unharmed and place his host under Jaime's command to march against the rebels Renly and Stannis Baratheon. Each of Stark's bannermen must send us a son as hostage. A daughter will suffice where there is no son. They shall be treated gently and given high places here at court, so long as their fathers commit no new treasons. His father's bones he shall have as a gesture of Joffrey's good faith. When asked why Robb would agree, Tyrion replies, "Tell him that we have raised another great host at Casterly Rock. Soon it will march on him from the west, while my lord father advances from the east. Tell him that he stands alone without hope of allies. Stannis and Renly Baratheon war against each other, and the Prince of Dawn has consented to wed his son Trystane to the Princess Myrcella."
We get an interesting moment where Tyrion Lannister ponders how all the previous hands of the king stood no chance against Cersei's schemes. Tyrion reflected on the men who had been hand before him, who had proved no match for his sister's wills. How could they be? Men like that, too honest to live, too noble to shit. Cersei devours such fools every morning when she breaks her fast. The only way to defeat my sister is to play her own game, and that was something the Lords Starks and Arryn would never do. Small wonder that both of them were dead.
Samwell's dad, Randyll Tarly, is actually with Renly Baratheon when Catelyn Stark goes to meet him in Bitterbridge. In the books, Randyll asks why Robb Stark didn't come himself and says, "I call it weak." Lord Randyll Tarly had a short, bristly grey beard and a reputation for blunt speech. No disrespect to you, Lady Stark, but it would have been more seemly had Lord Robb come to pay homage to the king himself rather than hiding behind his mother's skirts. Catelyn responds, "King Robb is warring, my lord," Catelyn replied with icy courtesy, not playing at tourney. To that, Renly grinned and simply says, "Go softly, Lord Randyll, I fear you're overmatched." When told of Ned Stark's treason, Jorah said, "Not bloody likely. The long summer will come again before that one would besmirch his precious honor." "What honor could he have?" Dany said. "He was a traitor to his true king, as were these Lannisters." It pleased her to hear that the usurper's dogs were fighting amongst themselves, though she was unsurprised. The same thing happened when her Drogo died, and his great Khalasar tore itself to pieces. Daenerys wonders how her brother would have reacted to the news. Tyrion Lannister doesn't threaten Lord Varys like he does in the show when he meets with him and Shae. Instead, Tyrion is wary of Varys and knows he is being threatened indirectly. We, the reader, only get his thoughts. "I was taken by a sudden urge to meet your young lady," says Varys. But what he meant to say was, "You tried to hide her, but I knew where she was and who she was, and here I am." When Varys suggested Tyrion should take care of Shae, Tyrion responded, "I intend to. Any man who tries to harm her, well, I'm too small to be a black ear, and I make no claims to courage." Tyrion thinks to himself, "See, I speak the same tongue you do, eunuch. Hurt her and I'll have your head." The threats in the show had to be more on the nose since we weren't inside the character's head like we are in the books.
It's actually Roose Bolton who Arya Stark is serving at Harrenhal and not Tywin Lannister. However, there is an interesting detail in the books where Arya imagines what would have happened if she went up to Tywin and told him the truth. She wondered what Lord Tywin would do if she marched up to him and confessed to being Arya Stark, but she knew she'd never get near enough to talk to him.
And anyhow, he never believed her if she did. And afterward, Weiss would beat her bloody. However, we reckon she could have easily proved it by saying stuff about her father that only a noble lady would know, and Arya would stand up for herself against Tywin, so he would probably believe her. It would have been so cool to see this happen and have Arya follow Tywin as he links up with the Tyrells. This was Renly and Catelyn's reaction to Stannis' letter of Joffrey's incest. Would even Cersei be so mad? Catelyn was speechless. Renly Baratheon, however, didn't fully believe it and thought it was a way for Stannis to become king. "Isn't that a sweet story, my lady?" Renly asked. "I was camped at Horn Hill when Lord Tarly received his letter, and I must say, it took my breath away." He smiled at his brother. "I had never suspected you were so clever, Stannis. Were it only true, you would indeed be Robert's heir." Robert could never have known, Catelyn thought, or Cersei would have lost her head in an instant. "Lord Stannis," she asked, "if you knew the Queen to be guilty of such monstrous crimes, why did you keep silent?" "I did not keep silent," Stannis declared. "I brought my suspicions to Jon Arryn." This is where Catelyn realizes why Bran was thrown from the tower. When Tyrion Lannister lectures Joffrey for tormenting Sansa Stark for her brother's crimes, he provides some very good counsel while also bringing up Stannis and Renly Baratheon's names. "Learn to use your ears more and your mouth less, or your reign will be shorter than I am. Wanton brutality is no way to win your people's love, or your queen's." "Fear is better than love," Mother says. Joffrey pointed at Sansa. "She fears me." The imp sighed. "Yes, I see. A pity Stannis and Renly aren't 12-year-old girls as well. Bronn, Timett, bring her." As Renly Baratheon was preparing for battle with Stannis, Catelyn visited a sept and thought of her mother. She was always so calm, Catelyn thought, remembering her mother's soft hands, her warm smile. If she had lived, how different our lives might have been. She wondered what Lady Minissa would make of her eldest daughter, kneeling here before her. "I have come so many thousands of leagues, and for what? Who have I served? I have lost my daughters, Robb does not want me, and Bran and Rickon must surely think me a cold and unnatural mother. I was not even with Ned when he died." Despite the animosity Renly and Stannis Baratheon had towards each other, Renly still respected Stannis enough to tell Lord Randyll Tarly that Stannis should die honorably. "When my brother falls, see that no insult is done to his corpse. He is my own blood. I will not have his head paraded about on a spear." "And if he yields?" Lord Tarly asked. "Yields?" Lord Rowan laughed. "When Mace Tyrell laid siege to Storm's End, Stannis ate rats rather than open his gates." Tyrion Lannister offered Sansa Stark some of his mountain clansmen for protection from Joffrey Baratheon after he was tormenting her at court. While on most occasions she would have likely accepted, she didn't in this case because Sir Dontos was helping her plan her escape. "Would you prefer black ears? I'll give you Chella if a woman would make you more at ease." "Please no, my lord. The wildlings frighten me." He grinned. "Me as well. But more to the point, they frighten Joffrey and the nest of sly vipers and lick-spittled dogs he calls a Kingsguard. With Chella or Timett by your side, no one would dare offer you harm. I would sooner return to my own bed." A lie came to her suddenly, but it seemed so right that she blurted it out at once. "This tower was where my father's men were slain. Their ghosts would give me terrible dreams, and I would see their blood everywhere I looked." Tyrion Lannister studied her face. "I am no stranger to nightmares, Sansa." When Stannis Baratheon gives his brother Renly the night to reconsider his declaration of being a king, it is actually Randyll Tarly, Samwell's father, who warns Renly to take care of Stannis before going after the Lannisters in King's Landing. "I say that Stannis is a danger to you," Lord Randyll Tarly declared. "Leave him unblooded and he will only grow stronger, while your own power is diminished by battle. The Lannisters will not be beaten in a day. By the time you are done with them, Lord Stannis may be as strong as you, or stronger." Jorah cautions Daenerys about King Robert's death. "Khaleesi, the Seven Kingdoms are not going to fall into your hands like so many ripe peaches. You will need a fleet, gold, armies, alliances. All this I know. Sometimes he thinks of me as a child he must protect, and sometimes as a woman he would like to bed, but does he ever truly see me as his queen? I am not the frightened girl you met in Pentos. I have counted only 15 named days true, but mine is the blood of the dragon. As was your brother's, he said stubbornly. I am not Viserys. No, he admitted. There is more of Rhaegar in you, I think. But even Rhaegar could be slain. Robert proved that on the Trident, with no more than a warhammer. Even dragons can die. Dragons die. She stood on her toes to kiss him lightly on his unshaven cheek. But so do dragon slayers. We actually get an admission from Tyrion Lannister that he is in fact in love with Shae despite their monetized arrangement. I'm free of Tysha now, he thought. She's haunted me half my life, but I don't need her anymore. No more than I need Alalea or Dancy or Marie, or the hundreds like them I've bedded with over the years. I have Shae now. Later on, when they're making love, Tyrion thinks, the wars, the intrigues, the great bloody game, and me in the center of it. Me, the dwarf, the monster, the one they scorned and laughed at. But now I hold it all. The power, the city, the girl. This was what I was made for, and gods forgive me, but I do love it. And her, and her. Sadly, unlike in the show, Shae never loved Tyrion, and he would realize this during his trial where he never sent her away. Catelyn Stark pondered if she'd have also tried to kill Jon Arryn and Ned Stark if she was in Cersei Lannister's shoes. Ned must have known, and Lord Arryn before him. Small wonder that the Queen had killed them both. Would I do any less for my own? It was at that moment where Catelyn connected the dots about Bran's assassination attempt after just hearing from Stannis Baratheon earlier that Joffrey was a bastard. Catelyn clenched her hands, feeling the tightness in her scarred fingers where the assassin's steel had cut to the bone as she fought to save her son. Bran knows too, she whispered, lowering her head. Gods be good. He must have seen something, heard something. That was why they tried to kill him in his bed.
Wyman Manderley, Lord of White Harbor, is portrayed completely differently than in the show. In Game of Thrones, he is more or less a coward, whereas in the books, he is a fierce Stark loyalist who, while obedient to the Boltons, is secretly planning revenge against them, cooking Freys into pie, which the show gave to Arya. All this despite the fact it could lead to his and his family's deaths. The North actually remembers in the books. A Targaryen king might have burnt alive his family in order to bring about dragons. In the books, the tragedy of Summerhall involved a fire that claimed the lives of King Aegon V Targaryen, his eldest son, Prince Duncan Targaryen, and Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Aegon was a good person and king, but over time, he became obsessed with acquiring dragons. It is speculated that the fire was the result of Aegon's growing madness and a fatal ritual he initiated. Aegon's older brother, Aemon Targaryen, notably tells Jon Snow in A Dance with Dragons, "There is power in a king's blood, and better men than Stannis have done worse things than this," which might be him hinting that Aegon caused his own death and the deaths of his loved ones in his pursuit of dragons. Everyone knows not to trust Peter Baelish. However, this is not the case in the books, where he is trusted much more whilst being seen as less of a threat. For example, here's how Tyrion observed him in A Clash of Kings. Littlefinger was no threat to anyone. He was a clever, smiling, genuine man, everyone's friend, always able to find whatever the king or the hand required, and yet of such undistinguished birth, one step up from a hedge knight, he was not a man to fear. He had no banners to call, no army of retainers, no great stronghold, no holdings to speak of, no prospects of a great marriage. Even Tywin doesn't fear Littlefinger, and Jaime thinks about making him Hand of the King because he is so low birth that he could never pose a threat to the Lannisters. Yet, as we the reader and Varys evidently know, Peter Baelish is one of the most dangerous characters in the series. Tywin Lannister was killed by his son Tyrion, but Oberyn Martell might have already poisoned him. Tywin was killed in the Privy, and it's later noted that his corpse unusually stank more than any other. The theory goes, Tywin might have been constipated due to Oberyn poisoning him. It's important to note that Tywin and Oberyn had breakfast together, and we also know of a poison called Widow's Blood, which shuts down a man's bladder and bowels until he drowns in his own poisons. The pink letter was not a big deal, but in the books, it leads to Jon's assassination. So when Jon Snow learns of Ramsay's supposed marriage to Arya, actually Jean Poole, he and Melisandre send Mance Rayder to rescue her. After Mance infiltrates Winterfell, Theon and Jean escape and join Stannis. Jon later receives a pink letter claiming Ramsay has killed Stannis, captured Mance, and is demanding the return of his bride and Theon. The letter's authenticity is debated, with some questioning if Ramsay really wrote it. For example, Ramsay would already have Theon and Jean if he beat Stannis in battle, and the whole build-up to a major battle in Winterfell would likely not involve an off-screen death for Stannis. The uncertainty surrounding the letter has led fans to speculate that Mance Rayder might have wrote the letter to create chaos at the Wall. Catelyn told Robb to march north or give up his crown. The next battle, Robb said, "Well, that will be soon enough. Once Joffrey is wed, the Lannisters will take the field against me once more, and this time the Tyrells will march beside them. And I may need to fight the Freys as well, if Black Walder has his way. So long as Theon Greyjoy sits in your father's seat with your brother's blood on his hands, these other foes must wait," Catelyn told her son. "Your first duty is to defend your own people, win back Winterfell, and hang Theon in a crow's cage to die slowly, or else put off that crown for good, Robb, for men will know that you are no true king at all." From the way Robb looked at her, she could tell that it had been a long while since anyone had dared to speak to him so bluntly. House of the Dragon Season 3 is not set to release until the summer of 2026. However, Thrones content will continue with A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms scheduled for release in 2025. This series is based on George R.R. Martin's Dunk and Egg novellas set 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones. It follows the adventures of Duncan the Tall and his squire, Egg. Duncan would later become the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, serving Egg, who ascends to the throne as King Aegon V Targaryen. Jon Snow was way more interesting than his TV show counterpart, who almost became a sad meme by the end, always saying, "I don't want it." However, this is a far cry from the book version of Jon Snow, who wants respect and recognition above all else. For example, in A Storm of Swords, Jon expresses his longing at the idea of Stannis legitimizing him as a star and making him Lord of Winterfell, and admits to himself, "I have always wanted it." The idea of marrying Val and forming an alliance with the Wildlings is also something that appeals to him greatly. He wanted it, Jon knew then. He wanted it as much as he had ever wanted anything. "I have always wanted it," he thought guiltily. "May the gods forgive me." It was a hunger inside him, sharp as a dragon glass blade. Whereas in the show, he rejects it because he doesn't seem to want anything. After Cersei Lannister's death in the Battle of King's Landing, Bran was unanimously voted the new king, but this makes no sense, and really it should have been Gendry. While Robert, Stannis, and Renly were all dead with no heirs, Gendry was legitimized by Daenerys as the Lord of Storm's End and head of House Baratheon. As far as lineage goes, House Baratheon had the rightful claim to the throne, and with no other eligible Targaryens, Gendry would have been the ideal successor. Helena appearing in Daemon's vision at the Weirwood Tree makes no sense. At the end of his vision, Helena tells Daemon that it's all a story and that he knows his part in it. However, Daemon was responsible for the murder of her son Jaehaerys, and although we do not know how much the Greens know about the planning of the murder, the TV show has chosen to depict Helena as an all-knowing dragon dreamer. Therefore, she would know Daemon was the orchestra of blood and cheese. By her appearing before him with encouraging words of prophecy and not a hint of anger at what he did to her is a disservice to her character and her son. Also, did she know her son would be killed and let it happen for the sake of prophecy? because in the books, she definitely did not let her son die and was plagued with grief forever afterwards. When Daemon has a vision of his brother Viserys saying he never wanted to be king, it actually doesn't make much sense. If Viserys truly didn't want the throne, he could have allowed Rhaenys to become queen in the first episode. Rhaenys had the rightful claim and genuinely desired to rule. The only reason there was any dispute was because Viserys and his supporters pushed his claim over hers. If Viserys had simply declared that he didn't want the throne and recognized Rhaenys as the rightful queen, she would have taken the crown. With her formidable dragon, Meleys, and her husband, the wealthiest man in Westeros, she could have easily maintained her rule. After her, Laena would have become queen, supported by Vhagar, and her children would follow, likely without opposition from Lenore. Daenerys Targaryen actually fed her dragons when they were first born into the wild. In A Game of Thrones, it's described as, the cream and gold dragon was suckling at her left, the green and bronze at the right. Her arms cradled them close. The black and scarlet beast was draped across her shoulders, its long sinuous neck coiled under her chin. When it saw Jorah, it raised its head and looked at him, with eyes as red as coals. There are so many crazy theories surrounding Meera Reeds, whose mother we have never met. The first one is that Lyanna gave birth to twins, Jon Snow and Meera, and both Howland Reed and Ned Stark took one of the babes each before departing from the Tower of Joy. The next crazy theory is that Meera's mother is Ashara Dayne, sister of Sir Arthur Dayne, who killed herself at the end of Robert's Rebellion. The reasons for her death remain a mystery. Some believe it was due to her brother's death. Others suggest that she has a broken heart from loving Ned Stark, and some say it was the grief over a stillborn daughter. However, an even crazier theory suggests that Ashara is still alive and living with Howland Reed, who was rumored to be infatuated with her. Ashara's body was never found, despite her falling to her death, and speculators believe that she is still alive. As of August 2024, 2 of the 3 live-action Game of Thrones spin-offs are confirmed: Aegon's Conquest and 10,000 Ships. The third show remains untitled, but there was speculation it could be an adaptation of Robert's Rebellion, which occurs over a decade before the events of A Game of Thrones, with younger versions of Robert, Ned, Tywin, Jaime, Stannis, and Cersei. However, this now seems unlikely, with reports saying that the idea has been scrapped at HBO. Margaery does not want to be queen, which might sound shocking to show watchers. But this is Littlefinger's assessment of the young Tyrell girl to Sansa in A Storm of Swords. She will keep her queenly crown and her maidenhead, neither of which she especially wants. But what does that matter? This is because it is Mace Tyrell who wants Margaery to be queen. So in the books, Margaery Tyrell does seem to just be a sweet, innocent girl just doing what she is told. However, a potential reason why Margaery's character was changed was so that she would match the book-only character Arianna Martell, who was not included in the Game of Thrones TV show. Arianna is conniving, power-hungry, and seductive, all traits that were given to Margaery in the show. Margaery Tyrell's character also matches Anne Boleyn, who ironically Natalie Dormer played in The Tudors. Ilaria Martell is not driven by revenge or a desire to incite a war with the Lannisters. She tells Oberyn's daughters, "I saw your father die." Ilaria Sand laid her hands on the mountain's head. "Here is his killer. Can I take a skull to bed with me to give me comfort in the night? Will it make me laugh? Write me songs, care for me when I am old and sick?" Oberyn wanted vengeance for Elia. Now the 3 of you want vengeance for him. I have 4 daughters, I remind you, your sisters. My Elia is 14, almost a woman. Obella is 12, on the brink of maidenhood. They worship you, as Dori and Lozera worship them. If you should die, must El and Obella seek vengeance for you? Then Dori and Lori for them. Is that how it goes, round and round forever? I ask you again, where does it end? As of August 2024, there are 4 animated Game of Thrones spin-offs in development: 9 Voyages of the Sea Snake, focused on the past of Corlys Valyrian and Golden Empire of Yitai, focused on the far east-inspired Isosi nation. The other two are untitled, but there are rumors and speculation that one of them may end up being the Game of Thrones story revisited once again. Given that it would be an animated series, it could very well include a more accurate representation of the story by staying true to the source material and including characters not present in the HBO show, such as Ariana Martell, Lady Stoneheart, Strong Belwas, and more. They could also adapt the Aegon Targaryen invasion of Westeros in A Dance with Dragon, so when Daenerys arrives on Dragonstone, she'll not only have to face the Lannisters and Greyjoys, but another Targaryen sitting on her father's throne. One of the best scenes in Season 2 of House of the Dragon is the set piece in Rook's Rest where Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys battle Aemond and Vhagar as well as Aegon and Sunfire. However, there is a small deviation. In the Fire and Blood book, Aegon and Aemond attack her as a duo. In the show, Aegon actually interferes with Aemond and Sir Criston's plan, which allows Aemond to attempt to eliminate his brother from the picture. Even though I prefer the book version, this was a super intense and great scene. Season 2 of House of the Dragon made a lot of changes, but probably the worst change was the blood and cheese scene with Helaena. In the show, Helaena identifies Jaehaerys to be killed by the duo, and although there was a moment of doubt, Cheese believes she's actually telling the truth. However, in Fire and Blood, she chooses Maelor, her youngest who was not present in the show, to die, and Blood and Cheese go on to kill Jaehaerys instead, which would have been so much more twisted and memorable. Daemon and Rhaenyra had no marital rift, and instead, Daemon was completely loyal to Rhaenyra. Season 2 should have opened with Daemon taking Harrenhal and securing the most strategic castle in the realm for his queen as a rallying point for Rhaenyra's forces. Since, in the books, him, Jace, and Luke all flew off at the same time. However, the show had Daemon linger on Dragonstone for 2 episodes where he caused the death of young Jaehaerys by accident. Meanwhile, in the books, Daemon orchestrated the entire Blood and Cheese event from the Riverlands, which makes him a lot more terrifying than the show version. The show then used Jaehaerys' death to cause a rift between him and Rhaenyra, with Rhaenyra questioning if they're on the same page about her being Viserys' rightful heir. Only then does Daemon leave, which is such a disservice to his book counterpart. In House of the Dragon, we learn from Lady Jean Arryn that there is a dragon roaming around in the Vale. This dragon, Sheepstealer, is not actually in the Vale in the books, but roams around near Driftmark. It looks like Rhaena will claim Sheepstealer as well, whereas in Fire and Blood, a 16-year-old girl named Nettles, completely omitted from the show, is the one to claim the dragon. However, the show can change course and introduce Nettles in Season 3. Anyway, subscribe for more. Arguably the most impactful moment of House of the Dragon Season 2 finale was Daemon getting access to visions from Bloodraven and notably seeing a preview of the Long Winter as well as Daenerys Targaryen in the future with her 3 hatched dragons. This is completely a show-only invention as there are no future Targaryens mentioned in Fire and Blood. However, what doesn't make any sense is that Bloodraven isn't born yet, and unlike Bran, he can't time travel, so it's not really clear why this happened. In the Season 2 finale of House of the Dragon, Daemon had control of the River Lords and they all waited for his cue before ultimately kneeling down to Rhaenyra. But why was this the case if they all hated him 1 episode prior? This season feels the most disconnected, and it might have to do with the writer's strike preventing revisions on the Season 2 scripts, which would have had this make more sense in Episode 7. The Riverlords told Daemon they support Rhaenyra, not him. Towards the end of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, we finally see Otto Hightower again, but he's imprisoned. This is a bit of an odd thing to see, as we have no idea who actually imprisoned him or why. It's also a show-only event, not in the books. However, when one of the House of the Dragon writers was asked about this, Even they did not know and just included it because they were told to, which is not the best sign of the show knowing what it is doing.
Sansa asks the Hound if he is afraid of dying. Aren't you afraid? The gods might send you down to some terrible hell for all the evil you've done. What evil? He laughed. What gods? The gods who made us all, he mocked. Tell me, little bird, what kind of god makes a monster like the imp, or a half-wit like Lady Tanda's daughter? If there are gods, they made sheep so wolves could eat mutton, and they made the weak for the strong to play with. True knights protect the weak, he snorted. There are no true knights, no more than there are gods. If you can't protect yourself, die and get out of the way of those who can. Sharp steel and strong arms rule this world. Don't ever believe any different. Sansa backed away from him. You're awful. I'm honest. It's the world that's awful. Now fly away, little bird. I'm sick of you peeping at me.
In the books, there's a tragic reason that explains why Lysa Arryn is so disturbed. The show leaves out a crucial detail to her backstory. Hoster Tully, her father, secretly forced Lysa to get rid of her child after discovering it was fathered by Littlefinger. In A Storm of Swords, Sansa Stark recalls Lysa's heart-wrenching confession. Tears ran down her aunt's puffy red face. I gave you my maiden's gift. I would have given you a son too, but they murdered him with moon tea. With tansy and mint and wormwood. It wasn't me. I never knew. I only drank what father gave me. This heartbreaking revelation explains Lysa's obsessive attachment to her son, Robin, and why she continues to him well beyond infancy. While this doesn't justify her actions, it certainly adds depth to her character, making her far more complex than her portrayal in the TV series. What would have happened if Jon Snow had been born with silvery Targaryen hair? Well, it would have been difficult for Ned to pass him off as his own son, which means he probably would have been given to someone else to raise. Well, Howland Reed, Ned Stark's best friend, probably could have taken him to Greywater Watch, and he would have grown up with Jojen and Mira Reed, meaning that Jon would have had a completely different upbringing and might have ended up with Mira instead. While the show is known for its and it pales in comparison to what really happened in the books. One such example involves Ramsay Bolton forcing Theon, now Reek, to perform on Jean Poole before Ramsay takes her himself, not Sansa Stark like they did in the TV show. And this is also probably why the show decided to change this, since audiences would not have wanted to see this happen to an underage Sansa Stark. This is what the book describes happening. Ramsay rose, the firelight shining on his face. Reek, get over here. Get her ready for me. For a moment, Reek did not understand. Do you mean, my lord? I have no... With your mouth, Lord Ramsay said, and be quick about it. If she's not, by the time I'm done disrobing, I will cut off that tongue of yours and nail it to the wall.